Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like, and if you've had a strange experience that you still can't explain, feel free to send it to me. The first story is about a young woman who creates an imaginary companion to help her sleep, but the feeling slowly becomes more real and starts following her everywhere. Her friend eventually takes her to the hospital after her health gets much worse. Whether Gigi is real or not, something is clearly wrong. Let's begin, and I hope you all have a good night and sleep well. Okay, I wanted to share an update because things became serious very quickly. I took my friend to the hospital today, and the doctors decided to keep her overnight. They ran blood tests, and we should have the results tomorrow. She looked exhausted, dehydrated, and honestly, much worse than I had realized. So they put her on an IV with fluids and vitamins. I also spoke privately with the doctors about everything that has been happening. They agreed that she should receive a psychiatric evaluation while she is there. I still do not know what I believe about this presence she talks about. Part of me thinks there must be a medical or psychological explanation. Another part of me cannot ignore how physically ill she has become, or how strange some of these experiences have been. During the ride to the hospital, she told me that Gigi is afraid of losing her. That is the name she gave the presence. It is a slightly ridiculous nickname here, the sort of name you might give an imaginary fool who cannot fix a leaking tap without flooding the kitchen. At first, she used the name jokingly. Now she says it with real affection. She asked me several times to turn around and take her home. I refused. The moment we passed through the hospital gates, she suddenly relaxed. She looked at me and whispered, "It's quiet now." That caught my attention because churches never made the presence disappear completely. She said it only felt distant inside them, like someone calling from the far end of a tunnel. At the hospital, she claimed it was completely gone. The nurses later told me that she fell asleep almost immediately and started snoring loudly. Considering how little she has rested properly, I am counting that as a victory. While we were waiting in the emergency department, she finally admitted that she is frightened. She said she used to enjoy the comfort Gigi gave her, but now she feels trapped by it. She does not want the presence around anymore, and she is afraid of what it is doing to her. Before leaving, I gave her a small silver cross on a chain. I had bought it years ago from a monastery, and it had been blessed there. I also gave her 2 little sealed bags, one containing incense and the other containing salt. I have no idea whether those things will help, but they seemed to make her feel safer. She listed me as her emergency contact, so the hospital can keep me informed. For now, she is somewhere safe, surrounded by medical professionals. I am trying to focus on that, instead of letting my imagination run wild. To explain how we reached this point, I should probably start at the beginning. I am 36, and my friend is 26. We work together as primary school teachers. When she first joined the school, I helped her settle in, and over the past 2 years, our friendship grew into something resembling an older brother and younger sister relationship. About 9 months ago, she bought a small apartment in Bucharest. It was in a newly finished building, so there had never been another owner. She had been single for a long time and often joked that her taste in men was so terrible that loneliness was probably safer. To help herself fall asleep, she developed a private ritual. She would imagine that someone was lying behind her, holding her gently until she drifted off. Eventually, the sensation became more vivid. She said she could actually feel an arm around her waist, breath near her neck, and fingers moving through her hair. She assumed it was some form of lucid dreaming or an unusually strong imagination. Over time, the experience became more intimate. She was embarrassed when she told me, but she said the imagined encounters sometimes felt completely physical. Then, the sensations began happening during the day. She would feel a hand resting on her shoulder while she graded papers. something would brush her hair away from her face. At other times, she would suddenly become warm, sleepy, and calm, as though she had been wrapped in a heavy blanket. That was when she started calling the presence Gigi. At first, she described him as comforting. I did not think much of it until we took our students on a trip through Transylvania. We visited old fortresses, monasteries, and several medieval churches. Inside the churches, she told me she felt alone for the first time in months. In the graveyards, however, she became visibly distressed. She kept looking over her shoulder and asking when we were leaving. She said she felt as though something inside her mind was urgently telling her to get away. The same thing happened in the older parts of the castles. She had never been especially religious, but the experience made her curious. Over the following weekends, she visited Orthodox churches, a Catholic cathedral, a mosque, and a synagogue. She also walked through Bellu Cemetery, which is famous for its elaborate tombs and monuments. The pattern remained the same. Inside places of worship, the presence became distant. Inside cemeteries, it seemed frightened or angry. After that, Gigi became stronger. My friend described the sensation as a rush of happiness spreading through her entire body. When the summer holiday began, she started sleeping for longer and longer periods. She said waking up felt like being pulled out of warm water. At one point, she realized that nearly 3 days had passed and she had barely eaten. That frightened her enough to visit her parents, but the feeling followed her there. She said Gigi kept surrounding her with warmth and making everything else seem unimportant. Later, she stayed with my wife and me for a weekend. She went into the guest room and hardly came out. We did not hear her shower, eat, or even walk to the bathroom. When she finally emerged, she had a distant smile on her face. She looked awake, but mentally she seemed very far away. A week ago, I visited her apartment. The heat inside was unbearable. The thermostat showed almost 36 degrees Celsius, even though the apartment faces north and is located between 2 other occupied units. Her windows were closed, but the heating system was off. She had lost a frightening amount of weight. Her skin was pale with a yellow tint, and her clothes hung loosely from her shoulders. For the first time, she asked me for help. She said she no longer believed Gigi was imaginary. She thought he might be a spirit or something similar, and she wanted him removed. Because she had been raised Orthodox, I contacted an Orthodox priest. A few days later, I also contacted a Catholic priest through my wife's family. Both visited the apartment separately and performed house blessings. Nothing changed. The following Sunday, my wife and I brought her to our home. We packed a bag for her, made her drink water, gave her soup, took her for a walk, and watched a light-hearted film together. For a few hours, she seemed almost normal. That night, I woke up and went to the kitchen for water. As I passed the guest room, I heard her talking. She was speaking softly to Gigi. It did not sound like someone delivering a monologue. She paused as though listening, laughed at things I could not hear, and answered questions. She talked about love, marriage, death, and whether 2 people could belong to each other forever. It reminded me of the long, serious conversations teenagers have during sleepovers, except there was only one voice in the room. The next morning, my wife and I confronted her. She laughed and said it was only part of her bedtime ritual. Whenever we asked another question, she changed the subject. That same day, 3 LED bulbs stopped working. One of my cactuses also collapsed into a wet, rotten mass. Plants sometimes do that, and bulbs burn out, but the timing unsettled us. That night, my wife and I both slept badly. We had feverish dreams and woke repeatedly feeling overheated and short of breath. In my dream, I was trapped in a conversation with someone who would not let me stop speaking. By morning, my friend was gone. She had packed her things and returned to her apartment before either of us woke up. We panicked but thankfully she answered when we called. She insisted she was fine. She was not fine. That is why I went to her apartment, brought her downstairs, put her into a car, and refused to take her anywhere except the hospital. I do not know whether Gigi is a hallucination, a coping mechanism, a symptom of an illness, or something I do not understand. Right now, the label matters less to me than keeping my friend alive. She is finally sleeping. The doctors are watching her. For tonight, that is enough. Hey, I want to share with you a few stories that have been on my mind lately. Nothing too wild, but definitely enough to make you pause and wonder. The first one happened just the other morning, and it still gives me the chills if I think about it too long. So picture this. It's early morning, and I'm getting ready for work. The house is still quiet, except for the soft sounds of my wife, Emily, in the bathroom putting on her makeup. Our little girl, Quinn, she's just about 2 years old, sits on the bathroom counter right next to my wife, playing with her tiny toothbrush. It's one of those calm, everyday moments. I suddenly remember I need to check something in the attic, count a few things for some renovation work we're planning. Our attic access is one of those pull-down doors in the ceiling of the main hallway, just about right above the bathroom door. So I pull down the ladder, climb up, and start counting what I need. Then, out of nowhere, I hear Quinn say, "Hi." At first, I just think she's talking to Emily, which she does all the time. But when I climb down and walk into the bathroom, I see Emily looking at me with this strange, almost stunned expression, like she's trying to figure out something that doesn't add up. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me this. While I was up in the attic, Quinn looked up and said, "Hi," again. But instead of looking at Emily, she was staring straight at the wall behind her. Then she said, "Hi," once more, still looking at that same spot. Then, slowly, like she was watching someone approach, Quinn lifted her head as if tracking a person walking closer. Then she tucked her arms in tight to her sides and giggled, the same way she does when she's trying to protect herself from tickles. Emily asked Quinn who she was talking to, but Quinn just stayed quiet. And then, right at that moment, the plastic makeup container Emily was holding snapped shut, like someone had slapped it shut. By then, I had come down from the attic and walked into the bathroom, but I didn't see the container move myself. I just heard Emily's story, and honestly, it was the first time either of us had anything like this happen in the 4 years we've lived here. Quinn has had some moments before, random giggling or pointing at things we can't see, but nothing quite like this. What really struck me was Emily's reaction. She's not the type to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Usually, she's the first to call out ghost stories as nonsense. So this shook her up, and it made me wonder, what else could be up there with us? Alright, now on to another story. This one's from when I was a kid, and I still can't shake it. I was about 12 or 13 on this summer kayaking trip down a river in a really remote part of France. We were carrying everything with us, tents, gear, the whole deal, and spent nights camping wild or at small campsites. It was this raw, beautiful place called Haute Allier, full of deep gorges, steep cliffs, and thick, old forests. One night, about a week into the 3-week trip, we stopped to camp along a rocky riverbank. I pulled my kayak up onto the shore and wandered ahead a bit, scouting where we'd pitch our tents. The shore was a gentle slope leading up to a dense line of tall trees with a clearing just beyond. As I approached the trees, something strange hit me. I felt woozy, like the world tilted just slightly, and I was drawn to look up at the trees. Between two of the trunks, I saw this opening, a clearing that stretched out into a vast, open plain I'd never seen before in that region. The sky above was a deep, perfect blue, with hills framing the sides. It was surreal, almost like stepping into a dream or a fantasy world. though it felt familiar somehow. In the background, I heard this faint, crystalline melody, like a pipe or a flute, but clearer, purer, and echoing softly, almost like it was coming from another dimension. It wasn't quite like anything I'd ever heard before, though later, the closest sound I could compare it to was a high-pitched harmonica. I stared at that shimmering opening for what felt like hours, hypnotized, until someone called my name. I blinked and looked away, and when I turned back, the clearing was just a normal patch of forest. The mysterious plain and that haunting music were gone. I never really understood what I saw that day. It wasn't heat stroke. I felt fine afterward, and we hadn't been exerting ourselves much. But every time I think about it, there's this deep longing inside me, like I was meant to step through that opening and go somewhere else. Finally, I want to tell you about something that happened at my friend Sarah's house, the old Miller farmhouse where she and her family live. It's a charming place, built back in 1929, full of original shiplap walls and beautiful old woodwork. Sarah and her husband, along with their 2 kids and dog, moved in earlier this year. The farm sits on a big plot of land in northwestern Ohio, surrounded by bean fields and open spaces. Sarah's landlord is Nancy, who's part of the family that's owned the land for generations. Nancy lives just over an acre behind them, and she's been battling esophageal cancer. Sarah's been helping keep the house in shape so Nancy doesn't have to worry about it. One morning, when Sarah was getting ready for school at around 6 a.m., her husband was home with the kids, letting them sleep in. Sarah was in the living room, trying not to wake the little ones with bright lights. That's when she saw it. The door to her children's room was open, and standing there was a figure. It was just a head taller than her kids, with a full head of dirty blonde curls, half hidden behind the doorframe, staring right at her. The figure slowly pulled back its head and then vanished. What made it eerier was the layout of the room. There was no way anyone could have been standing at the foot of her daughter's bed and hiding behind the door at the same time. Sarah rushed into the room and found her daughter sound asleep, clutching her giant cow stuffed animal, both tucked in tight. She woke her husband up, visibly shaken, her pupils dilated and her hands trembling. He checked the room, and though he didn't see anything himself, he could tell she was genuinely freaked out. He asked if she needed medical help for shock, but she insisted she knew what she saw. Then, just a couple months later, something happened to her husband. While brushing their daughter's hair after bath time, he saw a black shadow cross the threshold of their children's room. He called for Sarah, his skin prickling with goosebumps, while their 3-year-old asked, "Who's in there, Dad?" Later, as they were putting the kids to bed, a little Tyke's circus toy suddenly started playing music on its own, going off multiple times on top of the toy box. It's the kind of toy that only makes music when you slide the little acrobat across the tightrope, but no one had touched it. Sarah came to see, and, just as she approached, the music stopped. None of their toys had ever done anything like that since moving into the house. So, yeah, these stories might sound strange, but they've all left a mark on me and the people I care about. Whether it's a little girl talking to unseen friends, a mysterious doorway to another world, or shadows lurking just out of sight, it's hard to ignore these whispers from beyond. I guess sometimes the past isn't as far away as we think, and old houses remember more than just the people who live in them. Thanks for listening. I hope these stories give you a little chill, but also a sense of wonder about the unseen world around us. Hey, I want to share with you a few stories that have been on my mind lately. Nothing too wild, but definitely enough to make you pause and wonder. The first one happened just the other morning, and it still gives me the chills if I think about it too long. So, picture this. It's early morning, and I'm getting ready for work. The house is still quiet, except for the soft sounds of my wife Emily in the bathroom putting on her makeup. Our little girl, Quinn, she's just about 2 years old, sits on the bathroom counter, right next to my wife, playing with her tiny toothbrush. It's one of those calm, everyday moments. I suddenly remember I need to check something in the attic, count a few things for some renovation work we're planning. Our attic access is one of those pull-down doors in the ceiling of the main hallway, just about right above the bathroom door. So I pull down the ladder, climb up, and start counting what I need. Then, out of nowhere, I hear Quinn say, "Hi." At first, I just think she's talking to Emily, which she does all the time. But when I climb down and walk into the bathroom, I see Emily looking at me with this strange, almost stunned expression, like she's trying to figure out something that doesn't add up. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me this. While I was up in the attic, Quinn looked up and said, "Hi," again. But instead of looking at Emily, she was staring straight at the wall behind her. Then she said, "Hi," once more, still looking at that same spot. Then, slowly, like she was watching someone approach, Quinn lifted her head as if tracking a person walking closer. Then she tucked her arms in tight to her sides and giggled, the same way she does when she's trying to protect herself from tickles. Emily asked Quinn who she was talking to, but Quinn just stayed quiet. And then, right at that moment, the plastic makeup container Emily was holding snapped shut, like someone had slapped it shut. By then, I had come down from the attic and walked into the bathroom, but I didn't see the container move myself. I just heard Emily's story, and honestly, it was the first time either of us had anything like this happen in the 4 years we've lived here. Quinn has had some moments before, random giggling or pointing at things we can't see, but nothing quite like this. What really struck me was Emily's reaction. She's not the type to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Usually, she's the first to call out ghost stories as nonsense. So this shook her up, and it made me wonder, what else could be up there with us? All right, now on to another story. This one's from when I was a kid, and I still can't shake it. I was about 12 or 13 on this summer kayaking trip down a river in a really remote part of France. We were carrying everything with us, tents, gear, the whole deal, and spent nights camping wild or at small campsites. It was this raw, beautiful place called Haute Allier, full of deep gorges, steep cliffs, and thick, old forests. One night, about a week into the 3-week trip, we stopped to camp along a rocky riverbank. I pulled my kayak up onto the shore and wandered ahead a bit, scouting where we'd pitch our tents. The shore was a gentle slope leading up to a dense line of tall trees, with a clearing just beyond. As I approached the trees, something strange hit me. I felt woozy, like the world tilted just slightly, and I was drawn to look up at the trees. Between two of the trunks, I saw this opening, a clearing that stretched out into a vast, open plain I'd never seen before in that region. The sky above was a deep, perfect blue, with hills framing the sides. It was surreal, almost like stepping into a dream or a fantasy world, though it felt familiar somehow. In the background, I heard this faint, crystalline melody, like a pipe or a flute, but clearer, purer, and echoing softly, almost like it was coming from another dimension. It wasn't quite like anything I'd ever heard before, though later, the closest sound I could compare it to was a high-pitched harmonica. I stared at that shimmering opening for what felt like hours, hypnotized, until someone called my name. I blinked and looked away, and when I turned back, the clearing was just a normal patch of forest. The mysterious plain and that haunting music were gone. I never really understood what I saw that day. It wasn't heat stroke. I felt fine afterward, and we hadn't been exerting ourselves much. But every time I think about it, there's this deep longing inside me, like I was meant to step through that opening and go somewhere else. Finally, I want to tell you about something that happened at my friend Sarah's house, the old Miller farmhouse where she and her family live. It's a charming place, built back in 1929, full of original shiplap walls and beautiful old woodwork. Sarah and her husband, along with their 2 kids and dog, moved in earlier this year. The farm sits on a big plot of land in northwestern Ohio, surrounded by bean fields and open spaces. Sarah's landlord is Nancy, who's part of the family that's owned the land for generations. Nancy lives just over an acre behind them, and she's been battling esophageal cancer. Sarah's been helping keep the house in shape so Nancy doesn't have to worry about it. One morning, when Sarah was getting ready for school at around 6 a.m., her husband was home with the kids, letting them sleep in. Sarah was in the living room, trying not to wake the little ones with bright lights. That's when she saw it. The door to her children's room was open, and standing there was a figure. It was just a head taller than her kids, with a full head of dirty blonde curls, half hidden behind the doorframe, staring right at her. The figure slowly pulled back its head and then vanished. What made it eerier was the layout of the room. There was no way anyone could have been standing at the foot of her daughter's bed and hiding behind the door at the same time. Sarah rushed into the room and found her daughter sound asleep, clutching her giant cow stuffed animal, both tucked in tight. She woke her husband up, visibly shaken, her pupils dilated and her hands trembling. He checked the room, and though he didn't see anything himself, he could tell she was genuinely freaked out. He asked if she needed medical help for shock, but she insisted she knew what she saw. Then, just a couple months later, something happened to her husband. While brushing their daughter's hair after bath time, he saw a black shadow cross the threshold of their children's room. He called for Sarah, his skin prickling with goosebumps, while their 3-year-old asked, "Who's in there, Dad?" Later, as they were putting the kids to bed, a little Tyke's circus toy suddenly started playing music on its own, going off multiple times on top of the toy box. It's the kind of toy that only makes music when you slide the little acrobat across the tightrope, but no one had touched it. Sarah came to see, and just as she approached, the music stopped. None of their toys had ever done anything like that since moving into the house. So, yeah, these stories might sound strange, but they've all left a mark on me and the people I care about. Whether it's a little girl talking to unseen friends, a mysterious doorway to another world, or shadows lurking just out of sight, it's hard to ignore these whispers from beyond. I guess sometimes the past isn't as far away as we think, and old houses remember more than just the people who live in them. Thanks for listening. I hope these stories give you a little chill, but also a sense of wonder about the unseen world around us. Hey there. I want to share a story that's been on my mind ever since it happened last December. So, I'm a 21-year-old medical student, but that January, I decided to take a break from school and work as a caregiver at a nursing home for elderly, dependent people. It was my first time doing something like this, and honestly, it was tough. I'd never really been around someone who was dying before, let alone seen anyone pass away. When I first got there was this woman, really old and very frail, who was close to death. Watching her struggle was heartbreaking and honestly a bit overwhelming for me. I was still trying to process it all when I came back one afternoon a few days later. My coworkers told me she had died the day before. Usually, when someone passes in the nursing home, the caregivers prepare the body, get everything ready before the funeral service comes. But this time, this woman had a contract with a funeral home, and they were supposed to handle it. For some reason, though, they hadn't come yet, so she was still in her room, lying on what they call a cold bed. It's like a chilled surface that keeps the body preserved. Her blinds were closed, the lights were off, and the door was locked. Only staff members had keys to get inside rooms. What struck me as unusual was that even 5 days after she passed, she was still there, just resting in that room. One morning at around 8 a.m., there were only 3 of us caregivers in the building. Let's call my coworkers Claire and Anna. I was with Claire, helping another resident with her breakfast when the phone rang. We only had one phone for emergencies, and it rings whenever a resident pulls on the little alarm string, like in a hospital, meaning they need help. When I saw the number on the caller ID, it was room 424. I didn't immediately remember who was in that room since I was still new, but as I walked down the hallway toward it, my heart sank. I suddenly remembered that was the room of the woman who had died. I froze for a moment, a chill running down my spine. Quickly, I ran downstairs to find Claire and asked if she knew if anyone was supposed to be in the dead lady's room, maybe family or the funeral workers. Claire frowned and said she didn't think so. I asked Anna too, but she had no clue either. The phone kept ringing, that shrill alarm making the silence feel even heavier. Anna told me to just check inside the room. Maybe it was the family needing something. I hesitated, but I went back up. The door was unlocked, and the light inside was on. I knocked softly and said, "Hello?" But there was no answer. I didn't have the courage to step inside. From the doorway, I could see the lady still lying there, untouched. My hands were shaking so much I thought I might drop my phone. I pressed the small green button outside her door to deactivate the alarm and ran back to Claire and Anna, explaining what had happened, my voice trembling. As soon as I finished, the phone rang again. Claire told me to stay and help with breakfast while she and Anna went to investigate further. When they returned, their faces were pale. They told me the strangest thing. No one had been in the room. The body hadn't been touched at all. They called around to everyone who might have had access, and no one was scheduled to be there. The eerie part was, the reason the alarm kept ringing was that the big red button under her bed, the emergency alarm string, had been ripped from the wall. I know some of you might be wondering about the smell or how a body could be left that long without anyone noticing. Well, in France, it's not unusual for bodies to be kept on cold beds in the room for a day or two, and the cold prevents much of the decay or smell you'd expect. 5 or 6 days is definitely on the long side and, honestly, a bit disrespectful to the family and the lady herself. But it does happen sometimes. About the alarm system, in each resident's room, there's a big red button attached to the wall by a string near the bed. If a resident needs help, they pull it, and an alarm rings at the nurse's station. Outside the door, there's a smaller green button caregivers press when they enter the room to deactivate the alarm and show that someone is inside. When pressed, a green light appears above the door. Press it again, and the light goes off. It's a simple but effective system. So here I was, standing there, heart pounding, knowing that the alarm kept ringing from the dead woman's room, the button ripped from the wall, and no one there. The whole hallway was silent, except for the faint buzzing of the alarm and the echo of my own footsteps. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something. That experience left me shaken. I couldn't explain what happened, and honestly, I didn't want to. Something about that room felt wrong. It was like the air itself was heavier, colder. I still think about that morning sometimes, wondering if the lady in room 424 was trying to reach out in some way, or if something else was there with her. Thanks for listening to my story. Sometimes, the things we can't explain leave the deepest marks on us. Hey, I want to share with you 2 stories that really shaped how I see the world. Stories that made me believe in things beyond what we can touch or see. So, sit back, maybe turn down the lights a bit, and I'll take you through them like we're sitting around a campfire. First, let me take you back to when I was about 9 years old. My family, my dad, my siblings, and I, were on this long trip to visit my grandparents. Their house was way out in the countryside, miles from anywhere familiar. To set the scene, the house was this old ancestral home, kind of caught between past and present. The living room and the upstairs bedroom were half renovated, still showing signs of wear and age. But the kitchen, bathroom, and the upstairs rooms that used to be part of a boarding house were untouched, still holding that old-time charm and a bit of mystery. The backyard stretched behind it, quiet and shadowed. Because the living room was a mess from the ongoing construction, we all gathered in the kitchen. The TV was perched there, a little out of place, but it was cozy. It was midnight, and we were watching a show with my 2 cousins, my sister, and my aunt. We were cracking up at the jokes, the room alive with laughter and the playful teasing that only family can share. The kind of laughter that makes your belly hurt. Then, out of nowhere, this loud noise erupted from upstairs. It sounded like kids running, stomping and thudding on the wooden floors. Naturally, we thought it was my aunt's children playing, maybe sneaking around in the dark. But before we could even call out to them, the noise came rushing down the stairs. And here's where it gets strange. Imagine this, a blur like brownish smoke or wind, speeding down the wooden stairway with heavy stomps like hurried footsteps. It swept past the TV and into the sink area, where the glasses in the rack started rattling like they were caught in a storm. For a moment, we were frozen. Our laughter died instantly, replaced by a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. We didn't know what to think. Then, as if that wasn't enough, the same gust, or whatever it was, swirled back up from the sink, past the TV again, and rushed upstairs. The frames hanging on the stairwell walls shook violently, and one even fell to the floor with a loud crash. The sound echoed in the silent house, sending chills down our spines. I remember thinking, no, hoping I was dreaming. But I wasn't. And even now, years later, that night lingers in my mind. I told many people about it. Some shrugged it off, others believed. My aunt, who spent a lot of time cooking in that kitchen, said she was used to strange happenings like that. My cousins and dad, who grew up in that house, seemed to just brush it off, like it was nothing new. But for me, that experience was terrifying. Something that planted a seed of belief in the paranormal deep in my heart. It's a memory that haunts me even now as an adult. Now, fast forward to this year. My brother, let's call him Jake, has this house in Virginia that I'm starting to think is haunted. And I don't say that lightly because I've always been skeptical about ghost stories. But what's happening at his place is beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Jake's a tough guy, a metalhead who drinks whiskey, covered in tattoos, loves off-roading and shooting ranges. He's got this girlfriend from New Jersey who's the tech whiz, helping him with all the computer stuff because he's not exactly tech-savvy. He used to tease me relentlessly, calling me silly names like Urkel Durkel, and getting into fights over nothing. But after moving into this house, he's changed. He's quieter, more respectful, but also scared, like something's weighing on him. He's been asking me to stay over when his girlfriend's away, or he crashes at my place. It's a big change. The strange things started small. He would come home from work and find the garage fan on, even though neither he nor his girlfriend had turned it on. Lights flickered on by themselves. One night, I was outside smoking, and I heard the basement door creak open. I looked, but no one was there. His girlfriend was bundled up on the couch, nowhere near the door. Then, a few weeks later, Jake and I were outside again, and we saw the basement doorknob turn and the door pushed open with force. The kind of force you don't expect from an old, stuck door. No wind, no logical explanation. His girlfriend saw plastic bin lids opening on their own. A friend felt a presence in the garage, like someone breathing behind him. Then things escalated. Jake was putting away a bottle in the kitchen cabinet when a knife suddenly jumped up a couple of inches. He tried slamming the cabinet door to see if it was just vibration, but nothing else moved. Later, Garlic salt and a box of pasta fell over, from places far apart in the kitchen. One night, Jake had a mechanic friend over, and as they walked into the basement, they both heard a loud, prolonged scream, a woman's voice, from upstairs. They just looked at each other, stunned. Later, when Jake told his girlfriend, her computer crashed and fell to the floor. We found out from the neighborhood HOA that decades ago, a pastor lived in the house. He was strict, hated drinking, smoking, and loud music, pretty much everything Jake enjoys. They said the pastor died in the hospital, but was very attached to the house. The neighbor confirmed the story and said a family with kids moved out quickly after feeling dread in the basement and smelling cigarettes where no one smoked. Last Sunday, Jake, frustrated and drunk, started yelling at the ghost, cursing him out. We heard a rumble upstairs and found the attic door open and pushed to the side. Now, this door is heavy and hard to open, set high up on the ceiling. You usually need a ladder. It was unsettling, like the house was breathing in the dark. I left that night because, honestly, I didn't want to stay there. Jake stayed at my place the next night too, still shaken. He woke up to a female moaning voice that shook his bed. Tuesday night, he slept at mine again. Wednesday, we went out with a friend, and when we came back, all the lights in his house were on, even though he swore he turned everything off days before. His girlfriend was out of town, so he was alone with these strange happenings. That night, while I was sleeping on the basement couch, I finally heard it, a faint, eerie moan coming from upstairs. It was real. I know it sounds like a horror story, but it's real life for Jake right now. He loves his house and the work he's done, but this presence is wearing him down. We're thinking of setting up cameras to catch proof, just to show people he's not going crazy. Thanks for listening to these stories. They're a reminder that sometimes the world is bigger and stranger than we think. And sometimes those whispers and shadows are more than just our imagination. Hey, I want to share something really personal with you. Something that's been on my mind ever since my dad passed away last week. We didn't have the closest relationship, honestly. He'd been really sick, but I hadn't been in touch with him much. We were in the process of reconnecting, but then, suddenly, he was gone. The funeral was just yesterday, and it was such an emotional day, you know? After everything, when the family gathered for the meal, I remember sitting there, quietly picking at my teeth, wishing I had some dental floss because I couldn't get this annoying little piece of food out. Funny thing is, when I got home, I never actually flossed. Somehow, that irritation just disappeared, and I was so wiped out that I just crashed and went straight to sleep. This morning, I woke up, made my bed, brushed my teeth. I always keep dental floss picks in a little bag by my sink so the cats don't get to them. Even then, I still didn't floss. But when I left my room and came back, there it was, a single, unused dental floss pick laying neatly on my bed. I stared at it, trying to figure out how it got there. I thought maybe one of my cats sneaked it in from behind the trash or something. They're crazy like that. But the floss was completely untouched, placed just so, like someone put it there for me, not tossed around or upside down or anything. I just stood there, feeling a little crazy, then threw it away and sat down and cried. It's such a weird thing, and I honestly can't explain it. Could it have been his spirit, leaving me a little parting gift? A strange gift, sure, but maybe one meant to tell me he was still around somehow. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Now, there's another story I want to tell you. Someone shared this with me recently, and it stuck with me. It's about these long, creepy fingers that a kid used to see at night. When he was little, he called them the bumblebee hands. It started as night terrors, a faceless head at the end of a long hallway, a figure just outside his bedroom window staring up at him, hands popping up over the side of the bed and then pulling back, and a shadow moving from room to room in the hallway, always with those hands. He thought it was just his imagination, or maybe the horror movies he watched. But the scariest thing happened when he was 8. One night, he actually felt those fingers, these long, cold fingers, gently sweep across his head from the headboard area. He was awake. He was terrified, heart pounding, sweating, and he even wet the bed. He couldn't move for what felt like forever. When he finally bolted out of his room screaming, he woke everyone up and got in trouble for it. That experience haunted him for years, making him sleep with the lamp on for ages. He's an adult now, and though he still gets night terrors, he's learned to fight them off somehow. But that night, that touch, is something he'll never forget. It was so real. And even though he doesn't talk about it much, I think there's something to it. Sometimes, the things we fear aren't just dreams. Speaking of fear, I want to tell you about this woman who's been feeling something really unsettling outside her home. It started one afternoon when she was on her way to do laundry. It was broad daylight, nothing strange, until she got near the laundry room and was hit by the worst smell of rotting flesh she's ever encountered. It was so intense that her body went into full fight or flight mode, and she ran back inside her apartment, locked the door, and had a panic attack. A week later, she and her husband were outside smoking at 1 a.m. when they heard what sounded like a dying dog. They went to investigate and heard a strange, wheezing whine that changed into an owl hoot. But not a real owl. It sounded like a person trying to mimic one. When they called out, silence answered, and then an eerie, unnatural laugh floated from the trees. A laugh that sent ice through their veins. They ran back inside, terrified. Then, a few days later, she saw 2 men walking near where the noise came from. One of them shined a phone light into the trees and then suddenly jumped back, and both took off running. There was pure fear in their faces, but she saw nothing. Things escalated. Her husband heard their daughter laughing in the field across the street late at night, but she was asleep in her room. Then, she found dried blood and scratches on her front door. A neighbor reported someone tried to break into their home the same night, but no one was ever caught. They hear noises on the roof, in the alley, and their dog barks and growls like it senses something unseen. She's tried calling it out, whistling, even antagonizing it, but it just laughs in that creepy way or goes silent. She's recorded some strange noises that sound like an owl mixed with a low moan, but every time she tries to catch it, the sounds stop. She's scared, feeling watched all the time. Her native coworker told her to leave it alone, wash the blood from the door, and stop trying to communicate. She wonders if it's something like a Wendigo or skinwalker. She's desperate for answers and wants to know if she's losing her mind or if something real is out there. Now, let me tell you about a terrifying experience from back in 2019 at an old school that's practically a historic site. Apparently, during the Japanese invasion, bodies were buried beneath the school floors. Just saying that sends shivers down my spine. This student went to get their books from their locker on the highest floor after lunch. The hallway was eerie. A statue of Mary stared down the hallway, her face kind of haunting. The hallway was lined with lockers on one side and a storeroom on the other, with a science lab straight ahead. As they reached the end of the hall and sat down to open their locker, they felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Then, from inside the science lab, loud heel footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, growing louder and louder before suddenly stopping. When they looked in, no one was there. The sky darkened, and after waiting in vain for someone to appear, they started to walk away. But then behind them, they heard children laughing and running. But this was a secondary school, and the kids shouldn't have been there. The noise wasn't from outside either. It was Monday, no activities scheduled. Suddenly, all the lockers began rattling and banging from the inside, making loud, terrifying noises. The student jumped back several steps, almost twisting an ankle, and ran back to class, crying. Everyone thought they were hysterical, but they never went back upstairs again. For their final year, their locker was on a lower floor and in a different building. And finally, I want to share an intense story from someone who struggled a lot, but found a strange, otherworldly encounter that changed their life. This person's life started tough. Addicted parents, foster care, and a tough path that led to heavy drug use and couch surfing at 19. One night, they were at a party house, a wrecked place where people passed out after taking their vices. A new girl arrived, looking almost glowing, too pure for that world. They didn't talk much, and the storyteller passed out early, but woke up to find the girl pale, choking on fluid. They managed to get her to the hospital just in time. That moment hit hard, realizing she shouldn't have been in that place, making the same mistakes. It made them face their own choices and start trying to change. 5 years clean followed, but then the pandemic hit. They lost their job, and stress piled up. They took a fast food job to keep their apartment. One night, about to clock out, they found their old dealer and a friend smoking behind the dumpster. The dealer joked about having a side shack where people were brought for some dark purpose. The storyteller was furious and refused to get involved, but the dealer's words stirred old cravings. They pushed the dealer away, but soon after, they were ambushed and knocked out, waking up tied to a chair inside the shack, a dilapidated building in the woods. The dealer and his friend set up a live stream, and the storyteller's fear grew as a massive wild boar, bigger than any normal animal, appeared. Its eyes glowed white, and it attacked, biting deep into their bones, but not in a way that killed. The pain was beyond physical, ripping something unseen from within. Then, the storyteller blacked out, only to awaken to the boar having devoured the dealer and his friend. Flashlights approached, the police, and a deep voice echoed from the boar. "They shall take your freedom. Come along with me." The boar transformed into a towering man with muscles like trees and a cloth covering his face. He called himself a god, Brawn, the boar god, who made a deal to feast on those brought to the shack. He'd eaten the dealer and his friend, but considered the storyteller a rare delicacy because, instead of flesh, he'd feasted on their addictions, the rot inside that had eaten away their soul. Braun explained that the craving would return one day, and he'd come back to feast again. Yet, he left some respect for the storyteller's strength in resisting for so long, promising to check in again. The storyteller was left shaken, but strangely grateful. A break from the pain, a chance to keep fighting. Braun disappeared as the storyteller made their way back to the road, the weight of the encounter heavy, but a strange hope glimmering. Back at work, they lied about their bruised face, and the coworker who'd been dragged away from those men thought they'd fought them off, giving the storyteller some unexpected respect. That's the story, a mix of pain, fear, and strange, eerie moments that remind us how fragile and mysterious life can be. Sometimes, the gifts we receive, from the memories of a lost father, the haunted shadows in a school hallway, or a terrifying god in the woods, are strange, unsettling, but maybe meant to guide us through the darkness. Thanks for listening. Hey there. I want to share with you two chilling tales that have always stuck with me. Stories about the Barari family in Delhi and the mysterious fate of the SS Ourang Medan. So, Let me take you through these eerie accounts as if we're sitting down together on a quiet evening. Let's start with the Barari family. You see, the Chundawat family, originally farmers from a remote desert, decided to leave their dusty farmlands behind in 1989. They moved to northern Delhi, dreaming of a fresh start. At first, it was just Bhopal. Well, his name was actually Bhupal, and his wife, Narayani, along with their youngest son, Lalit, who moved out. But over the years, one by one, all 12 family members settled into the same house in the bustling city by 2007. They weren't just any family. They ran a grocery and plywood shop right on the first floor of their home. The shop thrived, not only because they sold quality goods, but also because the family radiated warmth. Bhupal was like the neighborhood dad, always ready with a smile, and Narayani, his wife, was the tender-hearted mother figure everyone admired. The neighbors fondly called them Daddy and Mommy. Narayani had this beautiful habit. She would often prepare little snacks and drinks for the street workers, and she cared for the local children as if they were her own. Gopal's 3 children, their spouses, and 5 grandchildren were always around the store, earning respect and affection from everyone. But then, in 2007, Bhupal passed away. It was a heavy blow, the loss of the family patriarch. Yet somehow, the family pulled together. They began working longer hours at the shop, eventually opening a second store with their earnings. Their health improved remarkably. They gave up alcohol and tobacco entirely. Even the children blossomed, doing better in school, surprising their neighbors with this sudden positive change. Everyone was happy for them, though no one could quite explain the transformation. Now, the story takes a darker turn on July 1st, 2018. The family, who never missed opening their shop at 6 a.m., didn't open that day. The neighbors tried calling, but there was no answer. Concerned, a 70-year-old neighbor decided to check on them in person. He walked up to their house and knocked repeatedly, but the silence was unsettling. Then, as he pressed harder, the door's knob twisted under his hand. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside, calling out their names, but what he saw made his blood run cold. The scene was so horrifying that he fainted right there. When he came to, he ran out screaming for help, and the police were called immediately. The first officer to enter the house barely lasted 10 seconds before rushing out, visibly shaken, only to return with reinforcements. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. In the front hallway, 10 family members were hanging, arranged in a tight circle, their hands and feet bound, eyes covered with cloth strips, mouths taped, and ears sealed with cotton balls. Black stools lay toppled beneath them. Nearby, Narayani, the mother, lay dead in her bed, a belt lying next to her. At first, the police suspected murder, but then they discovered 11 hidden diaries that revealed a far stranger truth. After Bhupal's death, the family had called a priest for a prayer in his honor. During that ritual, something extraordinary happened. Lalit, Bhupal's youngest son who had lost his ability to speak after an accident years earlier, started chanting. His voice, initially faint and unfamiliar, gradually morphed into Bhupal's very own tone. The family was stunned. Lalit had found his voice, but it seemed to be Bhupal speaking through him. Days passed normally, but from September 7th, 2007, Lalit began laying down strict rules for the family. Rules about when and how they ate, what to sell in their shop, and more. The rules grew more intense, almost punitive. Lalit claimed that Bhupal's spirit possessed him nightly, using his body to write these commandments meant to save their souls. Every evening at 9 p.m., Lalit would enter a trance-like state, leading a half-hour prayer. The family came to accept this new reality, addressing Lalit as Daddy, while only Narayani hesitated. Life seemed strange but manageable until June 17th, when Bhupal's grandchildren threw an elaborate engagement party. 2 weeks later, they invited a neighbor for dinner, and all seemed normal. The family chatted about the upcoming wedding with excitement. Then, just 2 days after that dinner, the shop remained closed and the family vanished into silence. The chilling discovery at their home revealed the family had performed a ritual they called Bad Tapasya. Lalit, possessed by Bhupal, convinced everyone that hanging themselves like the roots of a banyan tree would save their souls. They practiced for 8 days, learning to bind themselves, blindfold, and seal their ears. On the day of the ritual, they offered burnt sacrifices, then began the grim act. Since Narayani couldn't hang herself, Lalit and his wife strangled her with a belt in her bedroom. Then, one by one, the family members were assisted into the nooses, stools knocked away beneath them, leading to their deaths. Lalit and his wife followed last, confident that Bhupal would return to save them, even believing that the water in a cup nearby would change color to prove it. They left the front door unlocked, awaiting rescue that never came. Psychologists later suggested this was a tragic case of shared psychotic disorder, while Lalit's elder brother believed it was a planned murder. Some whisper about paranormal forces, but no one knows for sure. Now, shifting seas away, let's talk about the SS Orang Medan, a ghost ship wrapped in mystery. Back in 1947, ships from the Netherlands, America, and England picked up a spine-chilling Morse code distress signal from somewhere in the Indian Ocean, near the Strait of Malacca. The message was desperate. An officer, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew is dead. Then came gibberish, followed by, "I die." Then silence. The American merchant ship Silver Star was closest and tried to respond, but the Orang Medan never answered. So, the Silver Star's captain decided to divert course and investigate. Hours later, they spotted the Orang Medan drifting aimlessly, lights off, completely silent. No crew responded to whistles or Morse code signals. When the Silver Star's crew boarded, they were met with a horrifying sight. Crew members of the Orang Medan lay scattered on the deck, faces frozen in terror, bodies stiff, hands stretched out as if warding off some unseen horror. Even the ship's dog was dead, caught mid-growl. They moved deeper into the ship, finding more bodies in the same fearful positions. The officer who had sent the distress signal was found with his finger still on the telegraph, dead mid-message. Descending into the ship's lower holds, the Silver Star's crew felt an unnatural chill, as if the cold had seeped into the very bones of the vessel, despite the engine being off and no damage visible. The corpses showed no wounds, yet decomposition was advanced. Strange, given the distress call had been sent just hours earlier. The Silver Star's captain ordered no one to touch the bodies and prepared to tow the Orang Medan to shore for investigation. But as they began towing, smoke billowed from the ghostly ship, growing thicker and more ominous. The Silver Star cut the tow line just in time. Seconds later, the Orang Medan exploded with a force that lifted it from the water before it sank into the deep ocean, leaving no trace behind. The only records of this eerie episode are the testimonies of the Silver Star's crew and the ships that caught the distress call. So, 2 haunting stories, one of a family's tragic descent into darkness, and one of a ship lost to the sea and mystery. What do you think? Are these tales of shared madness, sinister plots, or something beyond our understanding? I guess some questions are meant to linger in the quiet moments, whispering their secrets to those willing to listen. Hey, I want to share this story with you. Something that happened back in 2017 that still gives me chills when I think about it. So, picture this. I was about 11 years old, totally fascinated by anything paranormal, always glued to YouTube, watching ghost stories and all that spooky stuff. My mom, though, She's a bit skeptical. Not super religious, but she does believe in God and the idea of evil spirits. So when I finally convinced her to get a Ouija board, well, it wasn't exactly a traditional one. It was this tablecloth with a Ouija board design printed on it. Kind of a quirky Halloween thing we bought from Spirit Halloween that year. I honestly wasn't too sure about it at first. I was scared it wouldn't work like a real board, but my mom thought it would be fine. We hung it up in my room, and honestly, it just sat there for months. We never even used it. But then, a couple of months after we got it, something weird happened. One early morning around 5 a.m., I woke up before anyone else. The world outside was still dark and quiet, but I got up anyway. I went to the living room and flicked on the TV, settling in to watch Adventure Time, one of my favorite shows to calm down. As I was sitting there, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow, black and fast, darting from the living room toward the hallway that led to my mom's room and my sister's room. My little sister was still asleep. She was in second grade, just like back then. I quickly turned to look, but of course, there was nothing there. I tried to tell myself it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dark, but deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. Fast forward a few months, and things started to get more intense. My sister and I had just come home from school when our mom told us something that really caught me off guard. She was experiencing some strange things around the apartment. Her thumb would go numb for no reason. The TV and radio would glitch or distort, and our pet birds were acting completely frantic, like they sensed something else was in the apartment with us. At first, I was kind of excited. I had always dreamed of experiencing paranormal stuff firsthand, but I was about to learn that it wasn't all fun and games. That night, things escalated. My mom said she and my sister were going to take our dog Sophie out for a walk. I wanted to stay behind to see if anything paranormal would happen, and she was okay with that. So I stayed alone in the apartment, watching Adventure Time again, trying to keep my mind off the creeping feeling something was nearby. Then, out of nowhere, my walkie-talkie, just sitting there beside me, sprang to life. A man's voice came through, but the audio was so distorted I couldn't understand a word. It scared me so badly I bolted outside to find my mom and sister. My mom tried to explain it away, saying maybe railroad workers nearby were using radios, since we lived close to the tracks. But it was the middle of the night, and I could clearly see from the window there was no one there. Plus, the walkie-talkie had been off, so I still have no idea how it turned on by itself. When we went back inside, the TV was frozen and glitched, and the birds were going crazy again. I even started feeling this sharp pressure in my chest, like something heavy was pressing down on me. Later that night, my sister ran out of our shared bedroom, terrified. She said she saw a faceless man standing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank face. We checked, but of course, nothing was there. She was too scared to go back in, and honestly, I was starting to feel uneasy too. My mom managed to comfort her enough for her to fall asleep. Then came the worst part. I woke up at exactly 2 a.m. My sister had woken up earlier and was already in my mom's room, so I went in to join them. All three of us were awake, trying to calm down, when the noises started. We heard footsteps in the hallway and kitchen, the sound of movie cases being pulled off the living room shelf, and pots and pans rattling in the kitchen. Our dog and cat were with us in the room, and the birds were locked safely in their cage, so it couldn't have been them. And no one else could have gotten in. The apartment door locks automatically and needs a key, which my mom had with her. The windows? We were on the 4th floor, so no chance someone climbed up there without breaking them. Then, the walkie-talkie in the living room turned on again, with that same eerie male voice speaking through it. I don't know what he was saying, but the voice was unmistakable. That night felt like forever. The strange noises and the walkie-talkie chatter went on for what felt like hours. When morning finally came, things started to settle. Nothing seemed out of place. No movie cases were scattered, no signs of disturbance. But I knew deep down it wasn't a dream. My sister remembered everything just as clearly as I did. After that, my mom threw the Ouija board tablecloth in the trash and refused to buy anything like that again. But even after it was gone, some strange things stuck around. Every night, if I slept in my room, I would wake up at 2 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. My sister had the same problem. It was weird because my mom never experienced this. And my sister kept seeing that faceless man off and on for almost 2 more years, even after we moved out of that apartment. She'd catch glimpses of him in dark hallways or rooms, but he'd always vanish when she looked directly at him. Thankfully, those sightings stopped early in 2019, and the sleepless nights eased up too. Looking back, people have told me it could have been a person or even a bear, but that just doesn't add up. We lived on the 4th floor in downtown Spokane. The building was old, but the security was tight. The only entrance was the door, which locked automatically and needed a key, and the windows were too high to climb without breaking them. So, whatever it wasn't human or animal. It's something I'll never forget, and honestly, it's left me with a healthy respect and a bit of fear of the paranormal. Thanks for listening to my story. Hey, I just want to share something really personal that's been unfolding over the years in this old house my boyfriend and I lived in. It's kind of a long story, so bear with me. My boyfriend, let's call him Jame, had been living in this place for about 10 years before I moved in. I joined him about 5 years ago, and from pretty much day one, I felt this presence in the house. It wasn't something I could see, but it was there, just lurking around. At first, it was subtle, but over time, it became clear that whatever it was focusing on me more than Jame. There were these strange moments where I'd hear Jame talking to me, but when I'd pull him aside afterward and ask what he was saying, he'd have no idea what I meant. Like, I'd hear him say something through my headphones, but he was oblivious. It was disorienting, honestly. And then there was the sleep paralysis. God, that was terrifying. If you've never experienced it, it's this state where you're awake but can't move, and sometimes something feels like it's attacking you. I'll be honest, some of those nights, I felt like I was being sexually assaulted by an invisible presence. It was horrifying. One particularly bad night, I was so petrified in our bedroom that I couldn't bear to stay there. I ended up moving to the lounge room just to get some sleep, but even then, the air felt heavy and weird. The spare room in the house also had this strange energy, like a cold spot or just something off. We once set up a camera in there while we were cat-sitting for a friend. We had 2 cats ourselves, and apparently, it's better to let cats get accustomed to each other gradually, so we kept the lounge room door shut between them for a bit. Anyway, back to the camera. Jame said he once saw what looked like static-like figures moving across the screen in that spare room. It wasn't just the cats acting weird. The camera caught some strange stuff too. All of this kind of built up, but things really came to a head when we started packing to move out to a new place. In those last couple of days, the sleep paralysis came back with a vengeance. It was rare, since I'd started sleeping on the couch instead of the bedroom. But there I was again, being violently choked and pushed, scratched until my arm bore a massive scar that I still have. The cats were on edge too, staring and hissing at empty corners of the rooms like they could see something I couldn't. Of course, moving is stressful, so tempers were already fraying, but this felt beyond just stress. The final night was the worst. We'd moved most of the big stuff out, just had some leftovers to pack. We were starving and decided to order a pizza. While Jame was in the shower, the house was mostly empty, silent except for the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of a clock. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this loud, guttural moan echoing through the house. It bounced off the walls, making it even eerier. At first, I thought it was Jame. Maybe he was just making a noise in the shower. But when he came out, I asked him to try to replicate it. He did, with the water running and all, but it wasn't the same sound at all. Then I had him moan from the lounge area where I was sitting, and while it wasn't identical, he hit the exact pitch and tone of what I heard. It was unsettling, to say the least. A couple of hours later, we were making one last trip to the moving van before shutting the house up for the night. It was about 3 a.m., and silence had settled deep into the walls. Suddenly, we heard canned laughter and some kind of conversation, like a TV show playing far off in the distance. But at that hour, nobody would be watching TV loudly, and no one else was around. The moment we stepped away from the house, the sounds stopped. I had to run back inside one last time, and the sounds started again, then abruptly stopped as soon as I moved away. It was surreal. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, is this normal? Is it good or bad? I wish I had a simple answer. This has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I've always seen shadow people, figures creeping around corners, lurking behind people, close by or far away. Sometimes their presence would freeze me with terror down to my bones. Other times, I felt oddly safe. Growing up in a really religious family, I was taught about angels and demons, about guardian angels watching over us. I used to rationalize the shadow people as my guardian angels, standing watch, protecting me from darker forces. One might appear standing in a doorway, with another shadow lurking nearby, and I thought maybe the shadows were the angels shielding me from demons. As I've gotten older, these sightings have become more frequent and more vivid. Now I can hold my gaze on them for up to 30 seconds before they vanish. They play peekaboo, sometimes just a head peeking out, other times a full body of varying sizes. They hide when I look directly at them, ducking down behind counters, couches, or doorways. It's like they're watching me, silently observing every move. Interestingly, a friend of mine, someone who'd never experienced anything like this before meeting me, told me he started seeing things after spending time at my house. He said he saw something dash after me from my room down to the hallway near the shower. After that, he began noticing similar phenomena at his own place. I even confided in one of my older sisters. She's 34 now, and she admitted she's always seen things like this too. The last time she was at my house, she saw something crouching behind her. When she looked back, it stood up and ran, but not before locking eyes with her. Pure white, horrifying eyes. Since then, she refuses to come to my house and insists on smudging or saging every time someone comes or leaves her own home. Sometimes I've had things thrown at me, like broken glass, and I can't explain it. My other sister has been having these disturbing dreams about a woman trying to take her baby when the baby was just a few months old. It's actually how she found out she was having a daughter. A few months ago, I had a nightmare so vivid and terrifying, I still remember the dread like it was yesterday. In the dream, this woman came into the house after my sister let her in, standing right behind her with a blank face, her face inches from my sister's shoulder. She wanted my niece and nephew, but I wouldn't let her take them. She never touched me or the kids, but somehow got my sister to hold them. When I tried to grab the kids back, my sister's grip loosened, like the woman's power over her vanished instantly. When I told my sister about it later, she said she'd been dreaming about this same woman for the past 12 years. So, I'm left wondering, is this bad? Is seeing the shadow people connected to these dreams and experiences? Could these be separate things, or are they intertwined somehow? I don't know what to do. I'm hoping sharing this helps me understand it better, or maybe someone out there can give me some guidance. Because living with these unseen watchers isn't normal, but it's become my reality. Hey, I want to share something with you. It's a bit of a chilling story, but I promise I'm telling it as honestly and warmly as I can, like we're just two friends sitting down for a late-night chat. So, a little backstory first. I'm 27 now, studying to be a veterinarian. It's been a tough ride financially, especially when the pandemic hit. I needed a job, and I found one at an old nursing home. I work the night shift there, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. At first, I thought it was just a quiet, maybe even peaceful gig. But as days turned into weeks, the place started to feel different. Uneasy, really. The nursing home itself? It's this old building, over 150 years old, with heavy wooden floors that creak like they're whispering secrets, and long, dimly lit hallways full of shadows that seem to move when you're not looking. It's got 3 floors, and even though they tried to modernize it here and there, you can still feel the weight of its history pressing down on you. One of the first odd things I noticed was the hand dryers in the common bathrooms. They'd just turn on by themselves. Not for long, just a quick blast of air, like 2 or 3 seconds, and then off. At first, I thought maybe it was some weird electrical glitch, but it happened so often, it started to creep me out. Then came the moment that really shook me. I was alone on the ground floor, which has the most active hand dryer of all, by the way. I was just wandering around, going to the coffee machine, phone tucked safely in my jacket pocket. Suddenly, wham! My phone got yanked right out of my pocket and slammed onto the floor. The screen shattered. My heart pounded as I scrambled to pick it up, feeling that surge of fear that something unseen was messing with me. I didn't stick around. I just got the hell out of there. There's also these emergency bells, loud, shrill alarms the residents press if they're in trouble, usually if they fall in the bathroom. But sometimes those bells ring out in the middle of the night when no one's there. It's terrifying because you rush to help, heart racing, only to find an empty bathroom. The silence after the bell cuts through the night like a knife. One night, I was drifting off during a quiet moment, eyelids heavy and thoughts foggy. Then I opened my eyes and saw a dark figure sitting in the room across from me. It was a man-shaped shadow, just sitting there, watching me. For a moment, I froze, breath caught in my throat, my mind screaming to make sense of it. But then I told myself it was just a trick of the light, just my imagination. I closed my eyes and finally drifted back to sleep, but the image lingered. And then there was last night, the scariest of all. I was exhausted, so I went to the room next to the nurse's office to rest. There are these long chairs there, kind of like old-fashioned benches, and I thought I'd just close my eyes for a little while. But as soon as I sat down, this heavy feeling settled over me, like someone was silently watching my every move. I tried to shake it off. "It's just your mind," I whispered to myself. I dozed off lightly, but about 20 minutes later, I woke up suddenly because the chair started shaking violently beneath me. It wasn't a gentle rocking, it was full-on trembling, like the chair was alive and trying to throw me off. I jumped up, lost my balance, and fell hard onto the floor. For a split second, I thought maybe there was an earthquake. Panicked, I ran to find my coworkers, breath ragged, and asked them, "Did you feel the earth shaking?" They looked at me like I was crazy and said no, probably just a dream. They laughed it off. But I know what I felt. And honestly, it terrifies me. Now, I want to switch gears and tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine, Jake, who worked at a different place about a year ago. He used to finish work around 1 or 2 a.m., depending on the shift. Nothing strange at first, but then he started to notice this weird light on a freeway overpass near his route home. It was this narrow, bright beam of light shining right on the bridge. At first, he thought it might be a pedestrian with a flashlight or a car's headlights. But here's the kicker. Every time he drove under that bridge, the light would vanish the moment he got close. You know those moments when your brain catches something odd and you just brush it off? That's what Jake tried to do. But this kept happening, night after night, like clockwork. Only he seemed to notice it, no one else. Jake started digging into what it could be. A car or person's light? Nope, too narrow and straight. A train or tram? The bridge was just a normal 4-lane road. Some scientific experiment? No consistent timing, just early morning hours. Pressure plate? Other cars were on the road, so why just his? Reflection from car lights? No, it didn't fit. After exhausting all options, Jake figured maybe he was hallucinating from fatigue. That was until he caught it on video. He showed the footage to his sister to make sure he wasn't losing it. The video was clear. This mysterious light flashed and vanished as he passed under the bridge. Jake left that job in March 2019, but he still can't explain what he saw. He's not one to believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but this experience made him question everything. I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes the world around us holds these strange, inexplicable moments. Whether it's a nursing home full of silent watchers and shaking chairs, or a vanishing light on a lonely freeway. And maybe the scariest part is not knowing why or how it happens. But hey, thanks for listening to me ramble on about it. It feels a little less scary sharing it with someone. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll figure out the truth behind these night whispers and the vanishing light. You know, sometimes life gives you these moments that just stick with you. Moments that feel like they're pulled right out of a storybook, but with a whisper of something otherworldly. Let me tell you about 2 such moments that happened to me, both so different, yet equally unforgettable. The first one happened when my great-grandmother, whom I lovingly called Nana May, was in the final stages of her life. She was in home hospice care, struggling with dementia. Imagine a house where Nana May's room is tucked away at the back, quiet and still, while my bedroom and the kitchen are closer to the front, separated by a good stretch of hallway and space. That night, I was lying in my bed, trying to fall asleep, when I suddenly heard this deep, slow breathing. At first, I thought it might be my dog, Max, who was known to snore or occasionally have trouble breathing. But Max was resting peacefully in Nana May's room, and the sound wasn't coming from where he was. I sat up, the room dark and silent except for that steady breathing. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from, but the sound just kept going, steady and calm. It wasn't aggressive or loud, but there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The darkness felt thick, almost alive around me. It was enough to make me flip on the lights, and then I did something I hadn't done in a while. I said a full rosary, each bead a small comfort against the strange feeling in the room. Sleep came, but it was uneasy, filled with shadows and the echo of that breath. The next morning, whispering so no one else could hear, I told my mom what happened while we were in the kitchen. I don't quite remember how she reacted, just that she told me I needed to tell the presence to go away. Later, when we went to help Nana May with her morning routine, bathing and feeding her, my mom pulled me aside and apologized softly. She said her father, Nana May's dad, had just come to look at me, and he didn't mean to scare me. I was amazed and a little comforted that it was a kind of visitation from my great-grandfather, a gentle presence amid all the sadness. That was just the beginning. Toward the end of Nana May's life, more visits came, shadows flickering in corners, a feeling that we weren't alone. But it never felt frightening after that first night. I like to think when she passed, her father came to take her home. Now, the second story is quite different, and it's about my stepmother, who was a practicing Wiccan. She had this wild energy, and growing up, I often caught her doing rituals in the basement, casting spells, sometimes on me or other family members. though I think it was all part of her craft and not meant to harm. One summer, we were on a family trip in St. Louis, Missouri, staying at a hotel after a long day of swimming and adventures. My little sister and I shared a bed. My older brother was in a recliner, and my dad and stepmom were in the other bed. Just as we were settling down, my stepmom got up and left the room, saying she was checking on something. When she came back, there was this wild, faraway look in her eyes. We all knew, without even speaking, that she had performed some kind of ritual while she was out. She often had that look after practicing, maybe from the spells or the herbs she used, and truth be told, she sometimes mixed in drugs, so it was hard to tell what was what. We all tried to settle into sleep, but my little sister, who was terrified of the dark despite having a witch for a mother, insisted on having a nightlight. I was lying there, the soft hum of the hotel around us, when my eyes caught a movement on the ceiling. And this is where things got truly eerie. There, stretched across the ceiling, was a shadow, a humanoid figure, but not quite human. Its feet seemed to emerge from the top of the doorframe, legs and body sprawling out across the ceiling, and a head hovering just a few feet above my bed. It was completely still, like a statue made of smoke, flickering and shifting subtly as if it couldn't quite hold its form. But the most chilling part? It had 2 hollow eye sockets, and I could feel it staring right at me. My heart hammered in my chest, every hair standing on end. I wanted to scream but was frozen, trapped between terror and disbelief. Then I heard footsteps. My older brother had gotten up to use the bathroom, his shadow now joining the eerie figure on the ceiling, cast by the nightlight. As his shadow's head drew near to the other shadow's face, the dark figure on the ceiling seemed to melt and snake back toward the door, disappearing into the shadows. My brother just shuffled past, oblivious to the dark presence or my silent terror. He finished and returned to his chair, and I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I woke the next morning to my father shaking me awake, but that night left a mark. From then on, I was wary of shadows and the dark, especially basements where my stepmom practiced her craft. It was a strange mix of fear and fascination, knowing that something unseen was there. I feel especially sorry for my little sister, who had to live with my stepmom's wild ways for many more years. If you ever want to hear more about my stepmom and her crazy, magical, and sometimes terrifying world, just ask. These stories are a reminder that sometimes the ordinary and the supernatural overlap in the most unexpected ways. Years ago, back in my hometown in Mexico, something happened that I still can't explain. And honestly, I think it may have involved a goblin, or one of those little spirits people say enjoy hiding things. For context, I've worked in the cannabis industry as a content creator for quite a while. At the time, a small brand contacted me about collaborating and offered to send me a box of products. They let me choose what I wanted, so naturally, I was really excited when the package arrived. My boyfriend's mother picked us up in her SUV so we could collect it. Afterward, she stopped by my house because I needed to grab some clothes and a small overnight bag. I was planning to spend the night at my boyfriend's place. He's my husband now, but back then we were still dating. I left the unopened package in the vehicle, ran inside for just a few minutes, grabbed my things, and then we drove straight to his house. Once we got there, I opened the package on camera and posted part of the unboxing to my Instagram story. Strangely enough, that was also the first time my account was suspended. I had around 11,000 followers, and it took several weeks to recover it. But during the unboxing, I noticed something else. One of the 3 wax concentrates I had selected was missing. I had chosen a shatter, a crumble, and a creamy butter wax. The shatter and crumble were inside the box, but the butter wax, which was the one I had been most excited to try, was nowhere to be found. I checked the packaging several times, but it simply wasn't there. So I sent a message to the owner of the brand. I'll admit, I was a little dramatic about it because I had really been looking forward to that particular product. He replied and said, "That's very strange. I packed the order myself, and I remember putting everything inside. I'm really sorry though. I added a few extra flower samples that weren't on your list, so I hope those make up for it." I thanked him, and I decided to let it go. About 5 weeks passed. One afternoon, I was sitting alone on my bed at home, listening to music. My mother had someone who helped clean the house several times a week, so my bedroom had been swept, dusted, and organized many times since the package arrived. And remember, I hadn't even opened the box in my room. I had opened it at my boyfriend's house. Under my wall-mounted television, I had a short wooden cabinet where I kept candles, crystals, and a few sentimental objects. It was basically a small altar. While I was sitting there, I glanced toward it and noticed a folded piece of white paper with tiny red shapes printed on it. I recognized it immediately. It was the same type of wax paper the concentrates had been wrapped in. At first, I thought, that makes no sense. I finished those products weeks ago and I threw all the wrappers away. I walked over and picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. When I unfolded it, I just stood there staring. Inside was the missing butter wax. It was still wrapped, still intact, and somehow, after more than a month, it had appeared on my altar in a room that had been cleaned over and over again. I felt incredibly embarrassed because I had complained to the brand owner, so I messaged him immediately. I said, "I owe you an apology. I have no idea how to explain this, but the missing wax just appeared on my altar. It wasn't there before. My room has been cleaned constantly, and I never opened the package at this house. Either I'm losing my mind or I have some kind of goblin following me." He answered almost immediately. He said, "Honestly, I think the goblin may have come from my house. I live alone. I don't have children, pets, or a partner. But the woman who helps me with the yard keeps finding little plastic toys buried near the fence. Toy cars, tiny dolls, things like that. Neither of us knows where they come from." After that conversation, objects started disappearing around my house more often. Small things would vanish from places where I knew I had left them. Sometimes they came back days later. Sometimes they appeared in completely different rooms. And sometimes they never returned at all. Eventually, I decided to stop fighting it. I made a tiny space near the altar with a glass of water and a few cannabis candies. It probably sounds strange, but I thought that if there really was a little spirit in the house, maybe a peaceful offering would encourage it to leave my things alone. And surprisingly, the disappearances slowed down. The truth is, that wasn't my first experience with something like this. Ever since I was a child, I've had objects disappear and then reappear in the exact place where I had already searched countless times. When I was young, it happened with toys, hair clips, coins, and school supplies. As an adult, for some reason, it has happened more than once with cannabis products. From what I've read, creatures like goblins or household spirits don't necessarily take things because those objects are useful to them. They take them because they understand that the objects matter to you. It's almost as though they enjoy getting a reaction. I'm not saying I know exactly what happened. I'm only sharing what I experienced. But to this day, I can't find a logical explanation for how that missing wax traveled from a sealed package in a vehicle, disappeared for more than a month, and then appeared perfectly wrapped on an altar inside a room where the package had never been opened. Whatever brought it back, it certainly made sure I noticed. My partner and I have lived in a few different apartments in this complex over the past 4 years, and he's worked on the property for almost that entire time. After everything we've experienced here, I honestly believe the whole place has some kind of paranormal energy. But there's one building in particular that feels much darker than the rest. The complex sits beside an old college campus that was later converted into a high school. Behind the school and our apartments, there's a huge empty field. According to local stories, part of that land used to be a cemetery many years ago. Our current apartment has its own strange activity. There seems to be a shadowy figure that moves through the playroom. Sometimes, the baby monitor activates when the room is completely empty. Strangely, it doesn't frighten me. The apartment doesn't feel threatening, and nothing truly harmful has happened to us. Unless you count the ridiculous number of spiders we keep finding, which sometimes feels supernatural all by itself. Our previous apartment was different. One night, something stood outside our balcony door and acted exactly like our deceased dog, Jasper. It scratched and moved around as though it wanted to be let inside. I immediately told my partner not to open the door. Jasper's spirit had followed us from home to home for years. He had never needed anyone to open a door for him before. So why would he suddenly need permission now? Whatever was standing outside that night, I don't believe it was him. Still, the place I watch most carefully is the building beside ours. Building 14. It's the building closest to the old cemetery grounds, and every year, usually sometime between late winter and early spring, something terrible happens in the same apartment. A new resident moves in, and within months, they attempt to end their life. Thankfully, the attempts have not been fatal, but twice, my partner has found residents wandering through the outdoor hallways early in the morning, confused and injured, knocking on doors and begging someone to help them. Another maintenance worker, a man named Daniel, who has been here for more than a decade, told us the pattern has repeated for years. It almost always happens around February or March. That building also has the highest number of residents moving out unexpectedly. Police are called there more often than anywhere else in the complex, especially for domestic disputes. It's difficult to explain, but people seem to change after moving into that building. They become angry, hopeless, and cruel to one another. It feels as though the place slowly turns people against themselves and everyone around them. Maybe the building is cursed, or maybe there's something inside it that feeds on misery. As for Jasper, our little ghost dog, we believe he found us during a camping trip about 11 years ago. At the time, we had 2 small white dogs named Millie and Pippin. While we were walking along a forest trail, I saw a third little white dog running back and forth between me and my partner, who was several yards ahead. I didn't think much of it. I assumed he had taken Pippin off the leash. When I finally caught up, I asked him why he had let the dog run loose. He stared at me for a moment and then held up both leashes. Millie and Pippin had been beside him the entire time. I told him about the other dog, and we decided it must belong to another camper somewhere nearby. Maybe someone had allowed their pet to wander through the woods. We went home and forgot about it. Then I started seeing a small white dog in our hallway. It would appear for only a second, usually while both of our dogs were asleep beside me. I kept telling myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. At the time, I had recently stopped taking one of my medications, so I wondered whether I might be hallucinating, even though I had never experienced visual hallucinations before. This continued for several weeks. Then one evening, while we were watching television, my partner suddenly muted the sound. He looked at me very seriously and said, "Have you been seeing a little white dog that isn't Millie or Pippin?" I remember just staring at him. That was the moment we realized I hadn't imagined it. We started calling the little dog Jasper. We figured that maybe he had once become lost in those woods and had been waiting for someone safe to follow home. For more than a decade, Jasper stayed with us. He followed us from apartment to apartment. He even came with us when we stayed at my mother's house for several weeks after our child was born. I haven't seen him lately. Part of me hopes that means he finally felt ready to move on and cross whatever bridge was waiting for him. But Millie is elderly and nearly blind now, and every so often, she'll suddenly wag her tail, bark softly, or lower herself into a playful position while staring at an empty corner. Maybe she's simply confused in her old age. Or maybe Jasper is still here, quietly keeping her company. When I was little, strange things happened all the time at my parents' house. I remember objects suddenly sliding or flying off shelves, and the loft door banging from the inside when nobody was up there. So I already believed in ghosts, really. I didn't need much convincing. But the moment that truly settled it for me happened about 10 years ago, when I was working as a music teacher at a primary school. The school itself was old, the kind of building that seemed to hold on to every footstep. Because I taught music to every year group, all my instruments and supplies were kept in a big storage room down in the basement. To get there, you had to walk down 2 flights of stairs. At the bottom, just to the left, there was an old toilet that had mostly been turned into extra storage. Straight ahead was a short corridor, maybe 12 or 15 feet long, and then my music room was off to the right. Beyond that, there was another narrow passage that led to the art storage room. One afternoon, after lunch, I was getting instruments ready for my next class when I needed the toilet. Rather than go all the way back upstairs, I just used the little one near my room. I had finished and was washing my hands when I heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs. Not just ordinary footsteps either. These were clear, sharp clicks, like a woman walking in high-heeled shoes. That caught my attention straight away, because hardly anyone ever came down there. It was usually only me and occasionally the caretaker. I stood there listening as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Then they moved right past the toilet door and carried on toward my music room. So I leaned out and looked. I saw a woman walking away from me. She was dressed in a tweed skirt suit with a matching jacket, very old-fashioned and neat. Her hair was pinned up in a bun. At first, I assumed it must be the deputy head, because honestly, she was the only person I could imagine dressing like that. So I called out, "I'll be with you in just a minute." I dried my hands and went straight to my room. But no one was there. And that was the thing. Nobody had walked back past me. There had been no footsteps going the other way. The corridor was too narrow and too short for someone to slip away unnoticed. Still, I checked properly. I looked inside my music room, then went down toward the art store. Nothing. Nobody. I even called out, "Hello," a couple of times, but there was no answer. After standing there for a moment, trying to make sense of it, I went upstairs to the deputy head's office. Her office was near the top of the stairs, so I thought maybe it really had been her, and somehow I'd missed something. But she was sitting there eating her lunch, wearing completely different clothes. That made my stomach drop a little. I went into the staff room and told one of the teachers, "I think I've just seen a ghost." She laughed at first, until I described the woman. The second I mentioned the tweed skirt suit and the hair in a bun, her face changed. She told me to go and speak to another teacher, Mr. Harris. So I went to his classroom and said, "I think I've seen a ghost downstairs." Before I could even describe her, he asked, "Was she wearing a tweed suit with her hair up?" That stopped me cold. He told me he had seen her a couple of times himself, usually late after school, walking near his classroom and through the assembly hall. I've had other strange things happen in my life, but that one really stayed with me. After that, it took me a long time to feel comfortable going down into that basement again, especially first thing in the morning. It was always pitch black down there, and the light switches were at the bottom of the stairs, which meant you had to walk all the way down before you could turn them on. And after seeing her, that felt like a very long walk. Hey, I want to share a story about a night that my daughter-in-law Athena and I will never forget. It happened just a few weeks ago while we were driving home from the store. It was just after dusk, and we were on this quiet rural road in Washington, the kind of place where the houses are tucked back into the trees and the forest feels alive all around you. We've driven this road a million times, so we know every curve and shadow. I always turn on my brights out there, hoping to spot deer, but this time, what I saw was nothing like that. Halfway down the road, I noticed something reflecting in the distance, right off to the side. Eyes, but not the kind you'd expect. I started slowing down, and Athena looked up, curious about why I was easing off the gas. We both saw it then. It wasn't shaped like any animal we knew. This thing stood upright on two legs. It was tall, gray, with a long face, and its eyes were the strangest part. Not glowing yellow or white like a deer's, but a soft, glowing blue-gray. There was no nose or mouth we could make out. It just stood there, arms hanging long at its sides, watching us as we passed. As we drove by, it backed up into the trees, but it wasn't looking at the car. It was looking right at us. Athena just whispered, "Wait, what?" Because there was literally nowhere for it to disappear to, yet when we glanced back, it was gone. That feeling, the shiver down your spine, that stayed with us the entire night. The next day, we drove back to the exact spot, hoping for answers, or at least a clue. What we found was a tall fence surrounding the property, topped with razor wire. Definitely no way for anything to just vanish like that. It was all perfectly intact. This creature reminded me of something I saw years ago, on a road not far from there, crawling into bushes near some train tracks. Every time we pass that way now, Athena and I look around, wondering about what we saw. We keep asking ourselves, what would have happened if we had stopped? And more importantly, was this thing even alive? Thanks for listening. Sometimes the world holds more mysteries than we can explain. I grew up in a haunted house. Actually, I still live there. It's the kind of house where strange things don't really feel strange anymore. They just become part of the rhythm of the place. Like the old wood settling at night, or the pipes knocking in the walls. My family and I have all seen and heard things here over the years, and after a while, you stop trying to explain every little thing away. When I was very young, my grandfather passed away. He had been very sick, and from what my mom told me later, I saw him in a condition she wished she could have protected me from. She tried to shield me from it, but I guess I still saw more than a child should. Not long after he died, my sister and I were watching TV together in the old living room. Back then, the living room was at the back of the house instead of the front, like it is now. The back door had this large window in it, and the TV sat only a few feet away from that door. I remember suddenly feeling like someone was watching us. It wasn't a scary feeling exactly. I didn't feel threatened. I just felt noticed. So I turned and looked toward the door, and there he was. My grandfather was standing outside, looking in through the glass. I remember saying something like, "There's Grandpa," and I tried to tell my sister to look, but she didn't believe me. She never really did believe me about that. The strange thing is, I knew he had just passed away, but I don't remember being afraid. Maybe I was too young to fully understand what that meant. And as far as I knew, he had never really come to visit that house before when he was alive. So why he would appear there afterward, I don't know. But I know what I saw. The house itself is over 100 years old. It's made from old wood, probably from the mill that used to be in town. The town was actually named after that mill, so everything around here has that old, worn-in feeling, like history is tucked into the dirt and the boards. Someone once said there may have been native land in the area too. I don't know how true that is, but it wouldn't surprise me. The whole place feels layered. We know at least 2 people died in this house. One was an accidental hanging, and the other died of natural causes. Both were older women, from what we've been told. Over the years, we've seen full-bodied apparitions. My mom saw one recently, actually. For a while, this woman would float past her in the living room at night. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and her hands were clasped against her chest, almost like she was praying. She would move diagonally across the room, toward a corner where there isn't a doorway. That part always felt odd to me, because this is one of the oldest sections of the house, and it hasn't really been changed much. So it's not like there used to be a doorway there that got covered up. The woman never did anything else. She just passed through, night after night, following the same path. I've always wondered if maybe it was residual, like a memory replaying itself. Maybe from this house, or maybe even from a house that stood here before this one. I saw something once too, although mine didn't feel as peaceful. It happened one night when I was walking back to my room with a snack. I turned around, and for just a second, there was something standing behind me. It was shaped like a person, but the face didn't look human. It was just there, watching me. Then it vanished. We also hear footsteps sometimes, either in another room or going up the stairs when nobody is there. Things have flown off walls, shelves, and counters for no clear reason. I used to have this old radio with a cassette player, and I would play tapes on it all the time. Every now and then, it would stop right in the middle of a song, even though I always made sure the button was pressed all the way down. One night, when I went over to press play again and check the tape, I saw these golden flashing lights out of the corner of my eye. They were dancing on the wall beside me, almost like sunlight reflecting off something. But it was nighttime. The only light on was a regular bulb, and it wasn't flickering or doing anything unusual. Another time, when I was still in school, I came home, walked through the door, and made sure it closed behind me. I was alone in the house. I went to find a snack, and when I passed the breezeway, I saw that same door standing wide open. I know I closed it. I always closed it. There have been smells, too. Sometimes we'll smell roses, even though no one in the house wears perfume like that, or uses anything with that scent. Other times, we'll smell smoke for no reason at all. I've heard someone call my name when no one was there. Things go missing. We've even had what I can only describe as phantom vehicles pull up to the house. You hear them. You feel that sense that someone has arrived, but when you go to look, there's nothing there. Every once in a while, strange things show up in photos too. It's rare, but it happens. I remember one picture that was supposed to be of the kitchen, but in the image, there was this strange, smoky figure standing there. It almost looked skeletal, surrounded by an odd mist. My parents brushed it off and said it was probably just a defect in the photo. Maybe it was. But in that house, it's hard to believe every strange thing is just a mistake. And oddly enough, the house wasn't the only haunted place in my life. My last job was haunted too. I worked retail, and I was often scheduled to close. Strange things happened there after hours, and sometimes even before the store closed. The store was near the center of town, close to where the old mill used to stand. So maybe some places just hold on to things. Memories. People. Moments that don't know they're over. And maybe, when you live somewhere long enough, you start to understand that a house can be more than wood and windows. Sometimes it listens back. I was about 7 when my parents moved our family into a new house. It was my mom and dad, me, and my 3 siblings. And honestly, there was nothing strange about the place at first. It was in a good part of town, quiet neighborhood, nice houses, the kind of street where nothing really seemed out of place. My mom ran her own little business out of the basement, so she was often up before the rest of us, usually somewhere around 4 or 5 in the morning, working before we had to get ready for school. The first floor had hardwood floors, and anyone who has lived with hardwood knows the sound I mean. When someone walks across it, you hear it. Every step has that soft creak and tap to it. Now, my younger sister Lila used to sleepwalk when she was little. She was probably 4 or 5 at the time. My mom would sometimes hear footsteps upstairs and assume it was Lila wandering around again. She would go up to guide her back to bed, only to find the first floor completely empty. Then she would check the bedrooms, and everyone would be sound asleep. That happened more than once. There were also nights when my mom would hear Lila talking in her room. She'd go in and ask, "Honey, who are you talking to?" And Lila would say, very calmly, "The man. He's sitting on the bed." Of course, my mom thought it was just a little kid's imagination. Lila was young, and kids say strange things. But this went on for nearly a year. The part that still makes my stomach twist a little is that Lila remembers him even now. She says he was an older man, dressed in overalls, and he looked like a farmer. Later, we found out the whole neighborhood had been farmland before it was developed in the 1980s. Maybe that means nothing. Maybe it means more than I want it to. Years later, around 2013, I was home from college on winter break. I had gotten into the habit of staying up late in the basement playing video games, usually until 2 or 3 in the morning. Everyone else would be asleep, so the whole house had that heavy, late-night quiet to it. One night, I heard footsteps moving across the first floor. At first, I figured someone had gotten up for water or to use the bathroom, but when I went upstairs to check, nobody was there. The house was still. Everyone was in bed. A few days after that, I was lying down to sleep when an old baseball trophy slid off my dresser and hit the floor. It scared the life out of me, and I know how that sounds, but there was no reason for it to fall. No breeze, no shaking, no door slamming, nothing. It had been sitting in the same spot for years. After that, things started to feel different. Whenever I was alone in the house, especially down in the basement, I would get this awful feeling that someone was behind me. Not just a nervous thought. It felt like when you know another person is in the room, even before you turn around. The air would change. The hair on my neck would rise. My whole body would go cold. Then came the night I still think about the most. I was in the basement again, playing games late, when I heard footsteps above me. They moved through the kitchen, slow and steady, and then stopped right at the top of the basement stairs. I froze. A second later, I felt someone standing directly behind me. I was sitting on the couch, and suddenly I couldn't move. It felt like 2 hands were pressing down on my shoulders, holding me there. I tried to stand up, but I couldn't. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't even make a sound, and the room got cold. I used to laugh at stories where people said the temperature dropped when something was nearby, but I swear, in that moment, I could almost see my breath. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure lifted. I jumped up and ran. I tore up the basement stairs, through the kitchen, and toward the stairs to the second floor. Halfway up, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Running. Not walking. Running up the basement stairs at a speed that didn't sound human. I bolted into the bathroom, slammed the door, and locked it. The footsteps came right up to the bathroom door and stopped. I slept on the bathroom floor that night. A few months later, around April, I came home from college for a long weekend. I was alone in the house during the day, and I decided I was finally going to call this thing out. Not at night, obviously. I wasn't that brave. So I stood there and said, "All right, if you're real, do something." And I promise you, every door in the house opened and slammed shut at the same time, hard enough that the whole house shook. That was the last real experience I ever had there. Over the years, my siblings have admitted they had moments too. My wife, who I was dating back then, also heard the footsteps in that house. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe our minds filled in the blanks. Maybe old houses make old sounds. Or maybe Lila really did see a man sitting on her bed. I'll be honest with you. That wasn't actually the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that hotel. Not even close. Compared to what happened in the kitchen, that other stuff was almost gentle. For months after I started working there, people kept asking me the same strange question. "Have you seen the man in the kitchen yet?" And I'd always say no, because I hadn't. But nobody would really explain what they meant. Most of the staff I only saw for a few seconds at a time, usually while I was leaving in the morning and they were coming in to start their day. So I'd get these little comments in passing, these half questions, and then they'd be gone before I could pull the full story out of them. The night chef and the bartenders usually left around 1 in the morning. After that, it was just me and Mrs. Marlin, the older woman who had worked the front desk for what felt like forever. She handled the overnight paperwork and balanced the books from the day before. Eventually, I got tired of everyone being so cryptic about it. One night, I asked her straight out, "Why does everybody keep asking me if I've seen some man in the kitchen?" She looked at me for a second, then told me there had been a cook years before who had taken his own life back there. He'd hanged himself from a utility pipe in the rear part of the kitchen. And according to her, out of all the strange things people claimed to see in that hotel, the kitchen ghost was the one people saw the most. Also, she said, it was the one that scared people the worst. After that, I started asking around, and suddenly, everyone had a story. Servers, cooks, bartenders, cleaning staff. Every single person seemed to know something. Even the guard I had replaced, a guy who had always loudly said he didn't believe in that ghost nonsense, went quiet when I asked him. He just shook his head and said he didn't want to talk about it. That got to me more than any dramatic story could have. And honestly, after a while, I started feeling almost left out. Everyone else had seen this thing. Everyone else had their little brush with the kitchen ghost. I'd been walking that building alone every night and hadn't seen so much as a flicker. Then one night, I was making coffee for the morning shift, just like I always did. The hotel had these huge industrial coffee makers with enormous filters, the kind that looked like they belonged in a ship's engine room rather than a kitchen. Around 3 or 3:30 in the morning, I'd make coffee for the airline crews staying at the hotel. They had to leave around 4 to catch the early flights, and the kitchen staff wouldn't be in until at least 5. It gave me something to do, too. Nights could drag on forever back then. Internet wasn't something you could count on, so mostly I read, walked rounds, and did little tasks like that. The coffee machines were tucked into this narrow alcove near the convention rooms, close to the offices and the ovens used for longer prep work. The whole kitchen was sort of split in two from where I stood. To my right were the restaurant line stations, with enough light still spilling through to see clearly. To my left was the darker side, the banquet staging area, dry storage, and the deep freezers. That left side was also where people had pointed when they told me where the cook had died. Not exactly where, though. They always sort of gestured vaguely toward the back, toward dry storage. I had always figured that was why I hadn't seen anything. I never really had a reason to go poking around back there in the middle of the night. But that night, while I was scooping ground coffee into one of those huge filters, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. To my left, something moving. It looked like something was hanging in the middle of the room, gently swinging. I turned fast. Nothing. There was no one there. No shape. No movement. Just the dim side of the kitchen, with enough light bleeding in from the right that I could still make out the counters, shelves, and equipment. Now, I'm not really the type to panic right away. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I gave this nervous little laugh to myself and went back to making the coffee. But while I worked, I kept trying to figure out what I could have seen. Maybe a shadow, maybe a reflection, maybe something hanging from a rack that shifted when I moved. I tilted my head one way, then the other, tried to recreate it. Nothing worked, so I shrugged it off and reached for another bag of coffee. And when I turned back, I froze. It was there again. This time, I didn't snap my head toward it right away. I just held still and looked from the corner of my eye. There was a dark shape in the center of the room, swaying, slowly, gently. And I knew exactly why people described it the way they did, because it looked unmistakably like a body hanging there. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I told myself not to react, not to feed my own imagination. But then it started swinging a little more. That was enough. I turned my head straight toward it. And again, there was nothing. No body, no shadow, no object. Nothing moving at all. That was when this cold shock ran through me from my scalp all the way down to my feet. Not a chill exactly, more like my whole body suddenly understood something my brain was still trying to argue with. I set down everything in my hands, nice and careful, and walked right out through the convention room door beside me. I didn't go back into that kitchen until just a few minutes before the first pilots were due to check out. And out of everything that ever happened to me in that hotel, that was the one that truly got under my skin. I don't mind talking about it. Honestly, it's not something my parents ever liked discussing. They were the kind of people who would rather act like everything was ordinary, even when it very clearly wasn't. They would brush things off, change the subject, or pretend the house was just settling. But every now and then, even they would have these disturbing dreams. Not just them, really. Everyone in the household seemed to experience something strange at some point back then. The difference was, it was mostly me and my older sister who actually witnessed the more unsettling things while we were awake. She eventually reached a point where she couldn't take it anymore. For her own peace of mind, she moved out, and honestly, I can't blame her for that. For me, though, as I got older, everything seemed to become worse. Not quieter, not easier to explain. Worse. More frequent, too, until some of it was happening almost every day. Devices would turn on and off by themselves. Things would disappear from where we had just left them. Objects would show up in different places. Doors would slowly open or close on their own. Light bulbs would pop constantly. We would hear heavy footsteps, sometimes even the sound of someone running back and forth in locked rooms, or rooms we knew were empty. And whenever we unlocked one of those rooms and checked inside, there was nothing. Nothing out of place, no person, no explanation. But then we would lock it again, go downstairs, and within minutes the thudding would start again in that same room. It sounded like a grown man sprinting across the floor. There was also the bed shaking at night. That happened often, sometimes daily. Then there were whispers, faint voices when no one was nearby, and the dreams. which felt like the final little nightmare garnish on top of everything else. One incident in particular really stayed with me. It was around 3 or 4 in the morning, and my older sister Marielle left her bedroom and went into the upstairs sitting area. The whole place was dark. While she was there, she heard water running from the bathroom nearby. It sounded like someone had turned on the sink. At first, she assumed it was either me or my father. But when she walked closer to the bathroom, she saw something standing at the sink. She described it as a very tall, broad, shadowy figure, shaped like a large man. It looked like it was washing its face, with the lights completely off. She said there was something deeply wrong about it. Not just scary, but ominous. The moment she saw it, she panicked. She ran back to her room, locked the door, and stayed there until morning. When my parents found her later, she was still terrified and shaken. And she was in her late 20s at the time, so this wasn't a child frightening herself in the dark. They searched the entire house afterward. There were no signs of forced entry, no stranger inside, nothing missing, nothing unusual at all. After that, my parents had motion sensors installed in every room, along with a full security system. But it didn't last long. During the evenings, or close to dawn, the alarms would randomly go off. Different sensors would be triggered in empty rooms, and each time it happened, the system would call dispatch. Eventually, it became too much, and they had to permanently switch it off. What we ended up doing was closing off an entire wing of the house. That was the same wing where Marielle's bedroom had been, and it had always been the worst area by far. After that, we sealed off the entire 3rd floor. Then, 3 more rooms were avoided too, 2 on the 1st floor and 1 on the 2nd. That helped a little, not completely, but enough that everyone in the house agreed on one rule. No one was to enter those areas alone, and definitely not at night. My parents also became strict about locking every door and window at all times. New, stronger locks were installed throughout the house. If someone entered a room, the door had to be shut behind them and locked, especially in the evening. Before bed, we would go around making sure every single door and window in every room was secured. It was exhausting, honestly, but it made things feel slightly more manageable. Later, when I was older, I asked my father about the house. That was when he told me it had been built over ancient burial grounds. When they were digging the foundation, workers had found old remains and several funerary objects. The items were apparently handed over to museums, and the remains were moved to another burial site. But I was also told there might be another reason the house felt the way it did. Part of it had to do with the design. There was too much glass, too much ceramic, too many polished surfaces and mirrors. The size and dimensions of the place made sound carry strangely. Echoes traveled in odd ways. Someone described it to me almost like an echo chamber or a resonance chamber. They said houses shouldn't really be built that way because the energy, the sound, even the presence of things seems to bounce around and intensify. They said it can make things more visible than they should be. I still don't fully understand what that means, but when I thought about it, it unsettled me in a way I can't quite explain. And even then, I knew there was more to the story. There is definitely more, but it gets long, and honestly, it only gets stranger from there. I know exactly why something like that would shake you up. When it happens around your kids too, it hits a different part of your heart. It's not just fear anymore. It's that awful, prickly feeling of wanting to protect everybody and not knowing what you're even protecting them from. My story isn't quite as intense as yours, but I do understand that feeling. When I was growing up, it was just me, my younger brother, and our mom. She raised us on her own, and money was always tight. For a while, when I was still in elementary school, we moved in with my aunt and uncle out on their little acreage. They had this huge old farmhouse. Plenty of room for all of us, but it was the kind of place that always seemed to breathe and creak after dark. I was around 9 or 10 then, and I remember little strange things happening. Most of it I brushed off. Old houses make noise. Kids have active imaginations. Shadows look weird when you're tired. That sort of thing. But one day, I was taking a bath, and I heard a woman's voice right beside me. She said my name. Not shouted, not whispered. It was almost playful, sort of sing-song, like someone teasing a child from just over their shoulder. I got out of that tub so fast I probably left half the water behind. I ran out, still covered in soap, and started asking everyone if they had called me. Nobody had. Nobody had even been near the bathroom. I was so scared that I made someone sit in there with me just so I could rinse off. After that, years went by. Maybe 15 years or so. My aunt and uncle had moved several times by then, and their kids were teenagers. They still said something was with them. Not just in one house either. They believed it followed them from place to place. For a long time, I didn't believe them. I told myself that when I was little, maybe I imagined the voice. Maybe I dreamed it while I was awake. Maybe my brain just made something out of nothing. By my 20s, I had become pretty firmly skeptical about all of it. Ghosts, hauntings, anything like that. I figured my relatives were just suggestible, or maybe they liked creepy stories a little too much. Then I started spending more time with them again. My girlfriend at the time and I would stay over at their newer acreage every few weeks. We'd hang out, play board games, eat too much, stay up too late, all the usual family stuff. And once I was around them more often, things started happening again. My girlfriend didn't believe in ghosts at all, not even a little. But one night, in the spare room where we were sleeping, she saw something move through the room and go right out through the doorway. After that, she was a lot quieter about the subject. For me, it started with footsteps. I'd hear someone walking around when I was the only person awake, or when I was completely alone in the house. Then one night, around 3 a.m, I was in a room with the door open when I saw a young blonde woman run past. She moved fast, like she was sprinting down the hall. Right after that, I heard this loud bang, like she had slammed into a shelf or clipped a door frame. At first, I honestly thought it was one of my cousins. She was blonde and about the same height. So I got up and went down the hall to see what she was doing. The room she had run toward was empty. I checked around the house after that, feeling ridiculous but also completely rattled. Everyone was asleep. All of my cousins, including the blonde one, were asleep in the living room. That was the first time I really admitted to myself that I might have seen something. But the things I could not explain away were the ones that happened in broad daylight. One afternoon, I was sitting in the dining room. There was a pot on the kitchen counter with the lid still on it. I watched the lid lift up, tilt sideways in the air, and then settle back down. It didn't drop. It didn't slide. It moved slowly, almost deliberately. Another time, again in the dining room, there was a half-full box of books nearby. I saw one book flip up and out of the box. That sounds simple until you picture it properly. The box wasn't overflowing. The books were sitting several inches below the top edge. For that book to come out, it had to move upward first. It didn't just fall, it launched. My grandmother stayed with them for a while in that house too, and she had her own experiences. Mostly things moving, noises, objects acting like invisible hands had opinions. After enough of that, I stopped sleeping alone when I visited. Luckily, most of the family usually crashed in the living room together anyway. so I just joined the pile like a very nervous golden retriever. Eventually, I accepted that something really did seem to be attached to them. They moved again after that acreage, and one day, while I was visiting them in another house, I was sitting in the living room when I saw a man appear. He walked through the room, just calmly crossed the space, and vanished before he reached the other side. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A man. Since then, I've lived in a couple places of my own that I would honestly call haunted too. So no, I'm not the hardened skeptic I used to be. Whatever I thought I believed in my 20s, life has very quietly and very rudely rearranged the furniture. We used to live in this old rented house that sat right over a stretch of abandoned mine tunnels, and from the start, there was always something a little off about it. Not dramatic at first, nothing you could really point to and say, right, that's definitely not normal. It was more like shadows shifting where they shouldn't, little movements at the edge of your vision, things turning up in places you were sure you hadn't left them. But we had cats, so honestly, you can explain a lot away. Cats are little teleporting gremlins with fur. One second they're in the kitchen, the next they're somehow upstairs staring at you like you're the strange one. And our big ginger Tom, Rupert, was heavy enough that when he walked across those old, creaky floorboards, it genuinely sounded like a person moving around. The thing is, the cats were always jumpy in that house, always on edge. I didn't really notice how much until we started moving. We moved out slowly over about a week. Once we got the cats into the new place, they slept for 2 straight days. I expected them to be unsettled, hiding under beds and sulking in corners. But no, they were completely peaceful. I had never seen them so relaxed. And once they were gone from the old house, that's when everything seemed to get worse. One day, I was there by myself. The front door was open, and I was carrying boxes of books out to my car. We had already moved the furniture and the heavy stuff, so this was just the awkward, fragile, annoying little bits I didn't want thrown around in a van. The staircase came down into the hall near the front door, and I was coming out of one of the rooms when I saw it. There was this dark mass standing in the hallway. And the awful part was, the hall was full of sunlight. It should have been bright and empty, but this thing was just there. I turned properly toward it, and I saw enough to know I was looking at something, but I still couldn't really focus on it. It was tall, dark, kind of hunched and disjointed. The closest thing I can compare it to is one of those Geiger-style alien shapes, but smoky, like it didn't have clean edges. I don't know how to explain this without sounding ridiculous, but I knew it was looking at me. And I knew it was furious. The second I saw it, I felt sick. Not just scared, but physically sick. Nauseous, boiling hot, exhausted all at once, like my body had been unplugged. I backed out of the house, threw the books into the open car, reached back just far enough to slam the front door, and locked it. I would not go back inside on my own after that. I honestly thought my husband Callum was going to think I'd completely lost it when I told him. But he didn't laugh. He could see how badly it had shaken me. And that's when he told me something I hadn't known. A few days earlier, when we'd had the big moving van, he had been waiting outside while I locked up the house. He said someone, or something, jumped out from behind the long hedge by the drive, like it was trying to scare him. At first, he thought it was our neighbor messing about, but then he realized it wasn't right. He said it looked more human than what I described, but still dark. Solid, but somehow impossible to focus on. It was dusk, and the streetlights hadn't come on yet, so everything was that flat, gray-blue color. He said whatever it was jumped back behind the hedge just as I started walking down the drive. I actually remembered him looking toward the neighbor's place as we drove away and saying he thought he'd seen Brian waving. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. But after what I saw in the hallway, that memory turned cold in my stomach. We cleared the rest of the house in one go after that, with a ridiculous number of people helping. We didn't tell them why. We just made sure nobody was alone in there. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I don't know what he saw either. But even now, driving past that house gives me the creeps. And just for the record, the landlord sold it about 6 months after we moved out. Okay, so I worked for a few years at this PetSmart that always felt like it had too much going on, even after the doors were locked. Before I moved into grooming and eventually left for a small private shop, I was the live pets lead for a while. I also spent a short stretch helping manage stocking, so a lot of my shifts started ridiculously early. I'm talking 5:30, maybe 6 in the morning, when the store was still dark in that strange, half-awake way, and there were barely any other people inside. And honestly, almost everyone who worked there had some kind of story. Little things, big things. Things you could laugh off in daylight, but not so much when you were alone near the fish wall. One night after closing, I was tidying up when I heard something clatter hard behind me. I turned around, and this long box with a 36-inch aquarium light was on the floor. The weird part was that it had been sitting in one of those metal ring holders, and for it to fall the way it did, it would have had to lift straight up first. Not slide, not tip, lift. A few seconds later, I heard this faint sound, almost like children laughing somewhere far away in the store. Another night, a manager named Mara and I were near the grooming salon when the kennel doors started opening and slamming shut by themselves. Not once. Over and over. Bang, swing open. Bang again. We both just stood there staring, because there's a point where your brain stops trying to explain things and just quietly hands you a little panic sandwich. The alarms were another thing. The roof hatch and back door sensors would go off in the middle of the night all the time. The company checked them, tested them, said everything was fine. But multiple times, one of us managers would get woken up, drive out half asleep to meet the police, and find absolutely nothing wrong. Then there were the cats in the adoption center. They'd all suddenly lock onto something none of us could see. I mean, all of them at once. Their heads would turn together, their eyes tracking the same invisible thing moving through the room. Sometimes they'd chase it. Sometimes they'd just stare. One morning, I was in the isolation room in the back, feeding and medicating the sick pets. I finished up, opened the door, and immediately fell backward into the utility sink because standing right on the other side of the door, inches from my face, was this human-shaped shadow. Not solid exactly, more like mist with edges. The second I saw it, it dissolved. But the one that really stayed with me happened when I was still managing live pets. That morning, I came in early like usual. The only other people in the building were the stocking manager and one stalker, and they were working in the back with the forklift and pallet jacks. I was all the way up front at the fish wall, in the pump room, filling these big buckets with warm water so I could make cleaning soaks for the tank ornaments. The buckets took forever to fill, and eventually I realized I'd had way too much coffee. So I shut the water off, pulled the half-full bucket out of the sink, decided it was enough for what I needed, and went to the bathroom at the back of the store. While I was in there, I could clearly hear the forklift beeping and the pallet jack moving around through the wall. So I know, without a doubt, the only other two people were still back there. I finished up and walked back to the pump room, and when I stepped through the door, the bucket was back in the sink. Full. Completely full. And I watched the sink knob turn by itself and shut the water off. The room felt wrong, heavy, almost electric, like the air was holding its breath. I just stood there for a second and finally said, Thank you for finishing that for me." Then I picked up the bucket, added the aquarium chemicals, and went on with my morning. Because apparently, even ghosts at PetSmart had tasks to complete. I used to work the late shift at a small petrol station just off a busy road. And when I first moved on to nights, the woman who was training me, Marlene, told me very casually, almost like she was telling me where the mop bucket was kept, that the place had a ghost. I laughed it off at the time. I honestly thought she was just having a bit of fun with me because I'd be alone in the shop overnight. The doors stayed locked from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, and I served people through the little hatch by the tills. So yes, I was by myself, but I wasn't exactly eager to start believing I had company. At first, everything odd had a sensible explanation. Bread would slide off one of the angled shelves if it had been stacked too high. We were on a road where heavy lorries went past all night, and there were planes coming in over us for the nearby airport, so vibrations made sense. The little promotional signs on the shelves used to drop off too, but most of those had just been loosened by customers brushing past them. So I thought, right, there's your ghost. Bread and bad plastic signs. Very terrifying. But then, other things started happening. Random items would fall from shelves when I was nowhere near them. Not often enough to feel dramatic, but often enough that I noticed. And the strange part was, it always seemed to happen just before I was about to walk down that aisle to tidy or restock it. Nothing glass ever fell, though. We had wine bottles stacked on displays, and those were never touched. So I'd joke under my breath, "Thanks for the warning," as if the ghost was just a fussy little night manager keeping the place in order. There was also the till. The tills made a ringing sound when someone lifted a pump outside before I activated it. Every now and then, I'd hear one single ring and hurry back to the counter, only to find the forecourt completely empty. But almost every time, within seconds, a car would pull in. I still didn't fully believe anything was there. I just filed it away in the back of my mind as one of those strange things that happens when you're working alone at 2 in the morning and your imagination starts putting on a hat. Then one Sunday morning, just after 2, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I had been all around the shop. The office was locked, the doors were locked, and I knew for certain nobody else was inside with me. I was carrying a box of blueberry muffins, heading toward one of the middle shelf units, when I turned the corner and stopped dead. I walked straight into someone. Or nearly did. I actually flinched back and said, "Sorry," because my face had come so close to this person's chest that my body reacted before my brain did. But there wasn't supposed to be anyone there. For the tiniest moment, I saw him. A man, pale, almost see-through, with light hair and a blue-checked shirt. I think he was wearing jeans, but I didn't see much below the waist. He was solid enough for that split second that I truly believed I'd almost bumped into a customer. And then, he was gone. Not walked away, not stepped behind a shelf. Just gone. I stood there with that box of muffins in my arms, feeling the kind of cold that doesn't really come from the air. After that, I told a couple of people at work that I believed the ghost was real, but I didn't go into detail. I think part of me didn't want to hear myself say it too plainly. A couple of years later, one of my coworkers, Callum, covered a night shift for me. The next day, he told me that around 1 in the morning, while he was stocking shelves, he heard clear footsteps walking down the main aisle toward the till. Proper footsteps. He looked up, expecting to see someone waiting there. But the shop was empty. The doors were locked. He was alone. After the night I saw that man, nothing like that ever happened to me again. No figure, no footsteps, no sudden face-to-chest apology with nobody there to receive it. But I still believe that petrol station was haunted. I just wish I knew who he was and why he stayed. I was a retail store manager, and this happened about 10 years ago when I was working in a store in a small town in Bedfordshire in the UK. Now, I should probably say up front, I've had a few strange experiences before. Nothing constant, nothing dramatic every other week, but a handful of things over the years that I've never been able to explain properly. You could count the memorable ones on one hand, but I'd never had anything happen at work before, so this really wasn't something I was expecting. The store had a warehouse area with a mezzanine floor above it, where we kept a lot of extra stock. Part of my job was to go up there now and again and straighten everything out, make sure the shelves weren't turning into chaos. I'd been doing that regularly for months, so there was nothing unusual about the task itself. There was only one normal staircase up and down, right near the front. At the far end, there was a fire escape, but that was alarmed, and it led to an outside staircase down the side of the building. So when you were up there, you were very aware of where the exits were. One afternoon, I went upstairs to sort through some stock, just like I'd done plenty of times before. But the second I got up there, something felt wrong. And I don't mean I was just a bit uneasy. I mean the whole place felt heavy, oppressive really. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but it was as though the air had weight to it. Like the atmosphere was charged, almost waiting for something. I remember standing there and thinking, this doesn't feel right. I tried to ignore it at first. I had work to do, boxes to move, shelves to tidy. But the longer I stayed up there, the worse it felt. I kept expecting someone, or something, to appear around the end of one of the aisles. I had this horrible feeling that if I turned my head too quickly, I'd catch something watching me from between the stock. The strange thing is, I'd been up there dozens of times before. Same space, same shelves, same old warehouse smell, and I'd never felt anything like that. After about 10 minutes, I just couldn't do it anymore. I stopped what I was doing, went back downstairs, and found another job to get on with. I didn't make a scene. I didn't tell anyone. I just left. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I had this very clear feeling that if I stayed up there, something was going to happen. A few weeks later, I was covering the evening replenishment shift as duty manager. It was summer, probably around 9 at night, and I was standing out in the warehouse yard with a couple of the replenishment staff. From where we were, you could see the mezzanine inside the warehouse. One of the staff members, a middle-aged woman named Marilyn, was chatting with us. Then, completely out of nowhere, she turned to me and said, "Did you have a sister, or maybe a young girl in your family who passed away when she was little?" I told her no. Not that I knew of, anyway. There was nothing like that in my family history as far as I was aware. Then she looked toward the mezzanine and said, "I don't want to frighten you, but I've seen her standing next to you when you've been working upstairs." Honestly, that knocked the wind out of me a bit. I wouldn't say I was terrified exactly, but it properly shook me. I hadn't told anyone at work about the horrible feeling I'd had up there. Not one person. So for her to suddenly say she'd seen a young girl standing beside me on that same mezzanine, completely unprompted, really caught me off guard. And the part I still think about is this. Who was she seeing? I'd never felt like anyone was standing with me up there. I only had that one strange day where the whole place felt oppressive and wrong. After that, I did go back up there again before I eventually moved to another store, and I never felt the same thing. I've visited that store several times since then too, and I've been back up on that mezzanine. Nothing. No heavy air, no sense of being watched, no strange feeling at all. So maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just me having an odd moment that day, but I wasn't upset or stressed or in a bad place mentally. It came out of nowhere. And then, a few weeks later, Marilyn said what she said. That's the part that has always stayed with me. because maybe there really was something up there that day. Maybe I just wasn't the only one who noticed. I've got so many stories from that old strip mall, but this one still sits with me. I used to work in a little shop in the suburbs. We had 2 entrances, one door that opened straight outside into the parking lot, and another door at the back that led into the mall's interior hallway. It wasn't a big mall, just one long corridor with maybe 20 small businesses tucked along it. A dentist, a hair salon, a private gym, a few offices, that kind of thing. Our store was the only one that had both an outside public entrance and a public door into the inside hallway. This happened on Christmas Eve. The mall had been doing renovations that month, and we'd been told ahead of time to keep our interior mall door locked. Nobody else was supposed to be there that day. The 2 main entrances at either end of the corridor were locked, and the alarm was supposed to be set. It was just me and my assistant Laura working the shift, and it was painfully slow. Not slow like we had a couple customers. I mean, nobody came in for more than 3 hours. Corporate still had us there, of course, so we were just sitting around, talking, watching the store cameras, trying to make the time move a little faster. It was around 3 in the afternoon. We only had about an hour and a half left before closing. Then we heard it. This scream came from inside the mall. Not a startled scream. Not someone joking around. It was the kind of scream that makes your whole body go cold before your brain even understands what's happening. Laura and I both jumped up. Then we heard footsteps, fast ones, and doors rattling hard down the corridor, like someone was throwing their full weight against them, trying desperately to get out. You know that awful metallic glass door sound when someone grabs the handle and yanks with everything they have? It was that. Over and over. I grabbed a box cutter from behind the counter because it was the closest thing I had, and I went toward the staff door that led to our interior mall entrance. That door was one of those full glass doors with metal trim. It sat back in a little recessed area, so from inside our store you couldn't see much, just the business directly across the hall. But the sounds were definitely coming from the left side of the corridor, toward the dentist and the hair salon. Both were supposed to be closed. Someone was crying and screaming. No words, just screaming. It sounded like a man. And then we heard what seemed like more than one person running around. At least 2 sets of footsteps. They weren't running toward the exits, though. That's what made it feel so wrong. It sounded like they were running from storefront to storefront, grabbing doors, slamming hands against glass, rattling handles, going back and forth in a panic. We got close to our mall door, and then it stopped. Just stopped. Right in the middle of a scream. No fading away, no footsteps trailing off, no final door slam. Nothing. The whole mall went silent. I had the box cutter in my hand, and I unlocked the door. I told Laura to lock it behind me. She was crying by then, and honestly, I wanted to cry too, because whatever we had just heard sounded like someone running for their life. I opened the door as quietly as I could and peeked out. There was nobody there. The corridor was empty. All the lights were off, so the only light came from the long skylight running down the ceiling. It gave the whole place this pale, grayish glow. No movement, no people, no shadows ducking into corners, nothing. I went right back into the store. At that point, I was completely shaken. When you hear someone scream like that, you expect to see something. Blood, a broken door, someone hiding, some sign that a real person had been there. I told Laura to lock our outside door and put up a sign saying we'd be back in 10 minutes. I had her grab the phone and something to defend herself with, and then I went back into the mall through our interior door. I walked the whole corridor. I checked the store doors. Locked. I checked the main doors leading outside. Locked. I looked in the maintenance area. I checked the public bathroom. Nothing. No people, no unlocked doors, no signs of anyone hiding, no explanation. When I got back, Laura checked the parking lot through the cameras and the front windows. No cars. After that, we just sat there in silence until the shift ended. We didn't call the police because there was nobody to call about. No person, no damage, no evidence. Just what we heard. The next week, maintenance came by and asked me why I had gone into the mall and tried all the doors. I explained what happened. They got quiet. Then they told me sound travels strangely in that building because of the vaulted glass roof, and sometimes the mall makes weird noises when it's empty. But then they said something I'll never forget. They checked the mall cameras. I was the only person on them. I know what we heard. Laura knows what we heard. And whatever happened in that corridor on Christmas Eve, I don't think it was normal. I understand this in a way that still sits heavy with me. I'm 36 now, but my father passed away from cancer when I was 19. During the last few months we had together, we talked a lot about what might come after this life. I remember telling him that if there really was an afterlife, and if he could somehow reach me from the other side, he had to prove it to me. He agreed. That was our deal. About a month after he passed, I was at home in the living room with my best friend and my older brother, who has also passed since then. I had gone into the kitchen for something, and as I was walking back, I passed the hallway near the bathroom. That's when I heard my dad's voice, clear as day. He said my name. Just my first name. I stopped right there. I asked my friend and my brother if they had heard anything, but neither of them had. And honestly, I didn't need them to confirm it. I knew what I heard. Still, it would have been unreal if all of us had heard it together. Not long after that, I was home alone after school, down in the basement. We had this little rec room area down there with guitars, drums, a computer desk, all that stuff. I was sitting at the computer when, out of nowhere, this strange sensation came over me. It was heat. Not around me, but inside my chest. It got so intense, so fast, that I honestly felt like I was about to burst into flames. I pulled up my shirt and put my hand against my chest, and suddenly, I was overwhelmed with fear. I had never felt anything like it before, and I haven't felt anything like it since. Then I just reacted. I spoke out loud, almost without thinking, and said something like, "Why would you scare me like that? My dad wouldn't scare me. So if you're not my dad, get out of my house." After that, I started having recurring dreams about him. They were simple dreams, but they were devastating. So vivid that even talking about them now makes my throat tighten. The dream always began the same way. He and I would be standing a few steps apart, facing each other. Then we would move toward each other and just collapse into this embrace. We were both crying. I would put my hand against the side of his face, and I could feel the roughness of his stubble against my fingers and cheek, while our heads were pressed against each other's shoulders. Then I'd wake up. Sometimes I'd wake up crying. Other times I'd just wake up with that awful, hollow feeling of losing someone all over again. I try not to feel guilty about the fact that, after the chest incident, it felt like my dad stopped trying to reach me. Maybe, on the other side, it takes time to learn how to communicate without frightening the people you love. Maybe grief and fear make those moments harder to understand. Maybe the emotions around it all become too tangled to clearly know who or what is really reaching out. That's only my guess. But after that day, he never scared me again. He never really tried to engage with me in that way again either. And part of me thinks he knew I couldn't handle the possibility that it might not actually be him. The idea of something darker pretending to be my father terrifies me. I wish I knew how to connect safely, because I do believe there is another place. I don't know whether they stay close to us for the rest of our lives, or whether they only come through at certain moments. But I've had 4 men in my life, 3 family members and 1 close family friend, give me signs almost immediately after passing. Clear signs. The kind that felt like they were letting me know, without question, I came to see you. I'm still here in some way. I'm not even sure why I started telling this, or what advice I meant to offer. Maybe it's just this. Be careful. Make sure your spirit feels strong. Make sure you're grounded, wise, and not reaching out from a place of desperation or fear. If your household is involved, I think everyone needs to be on the same page spiritually. Everyone needs to understand the risks, the limits, and whatever method of communication is being used. I'm afraid of being manipulated, but that doesn't mean you have to live in that same fear. What I really want to say is that I believe you. The strange coincidences, the little signs, the things that don't feel random anymore, they can start adding up into something that feels very real. Be safe with it. Pay attention. And if anything new happens, I hope you share it. Have a peaceful night. Nathan. I moved in with a friend not long after my divorce, and honestly, I was just trying to get back on my feet. Money was tight. My life felt like it had been shaken out of a box and scattered everywhere, and I needed somewhere to land. But that house was strange from the beginning. It was laid out in this odd, almost stitched together way. There were rooms tucked behind other rooms, little spaces that didn't make sense, doors that opened into closets, and closets that opened into bedrooms. My room had 3 doors in it, which never felt normal. One of them led into a closet, and past that closet was this tiny side bedroom, almost hidden away. The place was full of built-ins too. Shelves, cabinets, strange little storage areas everywhere. And the basement was just as weird. You could look through one basement window and see another basement window beyond it, like the house had been added onto by a couple of feet, and nobody bothered to make it feel natural. It was the kind of house that made you pause and think, who built this, and what were they trying to hide? Not long after I moved in, I started feeling something there. And the odd part was, I only felt it when my friend wasn't home. At first, it was just this heaviness, a pressure in the room, the feeling that something was nearby and paying attention to me. I know that sounds vague, but I don't really know how else to explain it. My family has always been sensitive to things like that. We pick up on emotions, moods, energy, whatever you want to call it. One time, years ago, I was really upset about something, and before I even told anyone, my mom called me. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "What happened?" So when I say I felt something in that house, I mean I felt it in my bones. It got bad enough that sometimes I would have to run outside. The second I stepped out of the house, it would stop, just vanish, like I had crossed some invisible line it couldn't follow. My friend's father had lived there before him, and he had been a serious hoarder. There were boxes everywhere, old papers, random junk, piles of things nobody needed. It was overwhelming. A friend of mine came over and helped me clean. We threw out bag after bag of stuff. While we were going through it all, we found some notes and paperwork that made us both go quiet. I won't get into every detail, but there were things written down that made us believe his dad may have done some really awful things. We threw those papers out too. After that, things seemed to get worse. One day, I felt that presence come up behind me. It didn't just feel like something was in the room anymore. It felt like it wrapped itself around me. Not physically exactly, but close enough that my whole body panicked. I ran outside again, terrified. I yelled at it to leave me alone. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. I tried to be rational, but it kept escalating, like the more I noticed it, the bolder it got. Then came the mirror. I was getting ready for work one morning. There was a mirror in front of me, and behind me there was another mirror hanging above a shelf. I'm short, so I was standing on a little stool because the mirror had clearly been hung for my much taller roommate, Caleb. And in the reflection, I saw something standing in the next room. It looked like a black figure, almost like one of those award statues, only shaped like a man. Just a solid, dark silhouette. No face, no eyes, no features at all. It was standing there, angled toward me. I jumped down from the stool and looked into the room. Nothing. I climbed back up and tried to recreate what I had seen. I wanted there to be some explanation. A coat, a shadow, furniture, anything. But nothing in that room looked even remotely like the figure I had seen. And then my cat started acting completely out of character. He had only ever sprayed once before, years earlier, when there was a female cat in heat staying with us. He'd been neutered after that, and he had never had any issues. But in that house, he peed on everything. The washing machine, pots and pans, luggage, my shoes, boxes of old belongings in that little room off my closet. He even clawed up a pair of Caleb's boots. At one point, my cat ended up with a gash on his tail, and I still don't know how it happened. That was the part that really got to me. Animals know. They don't sit around trying to talk themselves out of what they sense. They don't make excuses. If something is wrong, they react. Eventually, my boyfriend at the time, who later became my husband, moved in briefly while he was between places. He felt it too. He didn't want me talking about it anymore. He said he was afraid giving it attention would give it more power. And honestly, I understood what he meant, because the house felt hungry for fear. We took the first rental we could find and got out. I never went back inside that house again. I've had strange things happen in other places too, but nothing like that. There was another house I lived in alone with my cat, and it had a Jack and Jill setup, with my bedroom connected to a bathroom, and then another bedroom on the other side. One night, I locked my bedroom door, left the bathroom doors open, and locked the far bedroom door. I woke up to a noise. My cat was staring into the back bedroom. When I looked, that door was wide open. I grabbed my gun and checked the house. Later, I tested the door from the kitchen side. I pulled it closed and hit it hard with my hand, and it only opened halfway. So I still don't know how it ended up standing wide open that night. Another time, I was watching TV and felt what I thought was my cat's tail brushing against me, swishing back and forth like he was irritated. I finally said, "Will you stop it?" But when I turned around, my cat was asleep on the other end of the couch. The difference was, that house never felt evil. Strange, yes. Unsettling sometimes, but not malicious. It felt more like a lingering spirit, maybe something that was just getting used to me being there. I still loved that house, and my cat was never scared there. But the house I shared with Caleb was different. Whatever was in that place felt dark. It felt wrong. It felt like it wanted us out, or maybe worse, wanted us afraid. And the second we left, my cat went back to normal. He has never behaved like that again. So when people ask me whether animals can sense things we can't, I don't even hesitate. Yes, they absolutely can. I've had strange things happen around me for as long as I can remember, so narrowing it down to one story is honestly difficult. But this one still sits with me in a way the others don't, because I wasn't the only person who saw it. My older child saw it too, and that makes it almost impossible for me to talk myself out of what happened. At the time, my youngest was about 8, and my oldest was around 12. It was just an ordinary weekend afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels unusual at all. We were in my oldest's room fixing a little framed drawing that belonged on my youngest's wall. The ribbon had snapped, and one of the pins was bent, so we were trying to get it sorted out. My youngest had been with us, then stepped out of the room. A minute later, my oldest and I both noticed them come back. Not directly, exactly. More like we both caught them in our peripheral vision, standing quietly in the doorway. Neither of us thought anything of it. We were focused on fixing the picture. It felt completely normal in the moment. Then we finished, stood up, and started toward the doorway to hang the drawing back up. As we moved, we saw my youngest turn and walk into the bedroom right next door. We were only a few seconds behind, but when we walked into that room, my youngest wasn't there. And I mean, there was nowhere they could have gone. My oldest and I just froze for a second, completely confused. Then the panic hit. We started calling for them, checking behind furniture, under blankets, in the closet, everywhere. We were loud. We were frantic. We were tearing through that room trying to figure out how they had vanished right in front of us. I remember sitting down hard on the bed because my legs just felt weak. My oldest was standing there, pale and close to crying. Then we heard a small rattling sound from my bedroom across the hall. We both looked up, and there was my youngest, walking out of my room holding a little container of tacks, totally calm, like nothing had happened. They had no idea why we were so upset. That was the part that really got me. We had been shouting their name. We had been making so much noise. But they hadn't heard us at all. And for them, barely any time had passed since they left the first room. For us, it felt like we had been trapped in that fear for much longer. After we hugged them and made sure they were actually okay, my oldest and I started talking through what we had seen. And that's when the details got even stranger. First, there had been no sound. The thing we saw didn't make footsteps, even though the floors were wood. It didn't speak. It didn't breathe loudly. Nothing. And now that we were thinking about it, the rest of the apartment had gone strangely quiet too. The TV had been on, but neither of us remembered hearing it during that moment. Second, whatever we saw wasn't dressed like my youngest. My youngest had been wearing a deep pink shirt and denim shorts. But the figure in the doorway had been wearing a pale gray top and pink pajama pants. We hadn't noticed that at first because everything happened so quickly, and neither of us looked straight at it. We just assumed it was my child. And third, the whole apartment felt wrong while it was happening. It was afternoon, maybe around 2 o'clock, but somehow the light seemed dimmer, flatter. The only light I remember clearly was coming from the ceiling lamps in the bedrooms. It felt like we had slipped into some strange little pocket outside of normal time, and then, once that figure disappeared, everything snapped back. I know how that sounds, I really do. But my oldest was the one who started naming those details out loud first. I wasn't feeding the story to them. They were telling me what they noticed, and I was realizing I had noticed the same things. To this day, we both believe we saw something pretending to be my youngest. A doppelganger, maybe. Or something in that apartment that knew how to mimic people. And the worst part is, that wasn't the only strange thing that ever happened there. Other neighbors had stories too. That place had a heavy feeling, like it was full of little echoes that didn't belong to anyone living there anymore. I still live in that apartment, and honestly, it still scares me. The reason I'm talking about it now is because something similar happened again recently. I was walking downstairs, talking to one of our cats, when I heard both of my kids answer me from different directions. I heard my youngest say, "Yes," and then, "Mom?" At almost the same time, I heard my oldest call out, "Huh? Did you say something to me?" Both kids were home, but when I checked, my youngest was in their room with headphones on, doing schoolwork. They said they hadn't spoken at all. So now I'm sitting with that same old feeling again. That quiet, crawling question. Who or what keeps using their voices? I have a few stories, but before I tell them, I should say this clearly. I've never really been someone who believes in ghosts. I'm more of a show me something real and then we'll talk kind of person. Which is a little strange, honestly, because I grew up in Luxembourg in a very old family house. It was built sometime in the 1600s, and for as long as I can remember, people in the surrounding villages said it was haunted. The house had been in my grandfather's family for generations. My dad grew up there too, and over the years, there were stories about someone being seen around the property, just appearing randomly. The last time anyone claimed to see this figure, people seemed to think it was a woman. The first story is about that last known sighting. When my dad was around 19, he invited some friends over while his mother was away. My grandfather had already passed by then, so it was just my dad and his friends in this huge old house. At some point that night, one of his friends, Grant, suddenly needed the bathroom. Badly. For whatever reason, he decided to use the bathroom upstairs, so he ran up this long wooden spiral staircase that goes through the house. And while he was rushing up, he bumped into a woman standing on one of the curves of the staircase. Grant said she made this loud, offended sound, like she was completely outraged that he had nearly knocked into her. She waved her arms at him, almost like she was saying, "Watch where you're going." He was so desperate to get to the bathroom that he barely looked at her. He just said, "Sorry," and kept going. Afterward, once he had calmed down, he realized he might have been rude. He assumed the woman must have been my dad's mother, because he knew my dad didn't have a sister. So he went downstairs and told my dad, basically, "I think I just upset your mom. Can you tell her I'm sorry?" And my dad said, "My mother isn't here. She's out of the country." That was when everyone got scared. Because Grant was completely sure he had seen someone. Not just a shape, not just a shadow. Someone who reacted to him. Someone who made a sound and moved her arms. My dad started thinking there might be an intruder in the house, so they searched everywhere. The attic, the cellar, the barns, the old stables, the bedrooms, the cupboards, under beds, even outside near the garden and the old well. They found nothing. To this day, nobody really knows what Grant saw. Maybe it was the ghost people talked about. Maybe it was someone who somehow got in and disappeared. Or maybe, and this is honestly what I lean toward, Grant had been drinking and his imagination did the rest. I actually met him years later when I was about 14, and he still told the story with this wide-eyed seriousness. He was absolutely convinced he ran into someone on that staircase. Now, I lived in that house for 25 years, and I never saw a full apparition. I never had some dramatic, ghostly encounter. But there was one night I still can't properly explain. I must have been around 8 or 9. I was asleep in bed when I woke up at about 3 in the morning to this heavy rolling sound coming from the attic above me. It sounded like something huge was moving across the floor. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine a heavy wooden barrel, covered in nails, rolling in circles above your head. Roll, 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 roll. Then these sharp little tapping sounds. Talk, 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 talk. Then rolling again. It just kept going. I was completely frozen. I didn't want to move because it felt like whatever was making that sound was directly above my bed. Then I heard my dad come out into the hallway. He stopped and listened. My mom was behind him. A moment later, my little sister opened her door and told him she was scared. That was the part that made it worse for me, because then I knew I wasn't dreaming. They could hear it too. My dad grabbed an axe and went up to the attic. And as he started climbing that same spiral staircase where Grant had seen the woman years earlier, the sound stopped immediately. He searched the attic and found nothing. No barrel, no fallen object, nothing out of place. And it didn't make sense because the attic was packed with old things. There wasn't enough open space for something large to roll around in circles like that, especially not for as long as it did without hitting a wall or crashing into furniture. We did have wild weasels in the attic sometimes, so maybe it was them running around like absolute lunatics. That's the explanation I usually try to settle on. But I still remember that sound so clearly. Out of everything that ever happened in that house, that was the closest I ever came to thinking, all right, maybe there's something here. The last story happened later, when I was living in the UK. After university, I went to study there, and once I finished, I decided to stay a bit longer and travel around before going home. I ended up volunteering at an animal sanctuary in Cornwall. It was a monkey sanctuary, actually, and people said that place was haunted too. I lived there for a year, in a room above the gift shop with other volunteers. People came and went all the time. Every couple of weeks, there were new faces. There was one girl, Clara, who stayed for a few months. She slept in the bunk right below mine. One morning, very early, she woke me up completely shaken. She was sweating, upset, and kept saying, "I saw people last night." I asked her what she meant, and she told me she had woken up in the middle of the night and seen two figures standing beside our beds. One was tall and dark, shaped like a man, and she said it looked like he was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The other was much smaller, about the size of a child. She said they were just standing there, completely still. She was so terrified that she pulled the blanket over her head and stayed hidden until she could tell the sun was coming up. I'll be honest, I didn't really believe her at the time. I had already been living there for months and hadn't seen anything. I also thought that if the place were truly haunted, surely more volunteers would be talking about it. So I told her, "Next time, knock on the bottom of my bunk and wake me up." Thankfully, she never did, because as much as part of me would love proof that ghosts exist, I'm pretty sure that if I woke up and saw two dark figures standing beside my bed in the middle of the night, my soul would pack a suitcase and leave before I did. I finished that whole year at the sanctuary without seeing anything myself. So no, I still wouldn't call myself a believer. But I do have a few stories I can't quite close the door on. I was around 14 when all of this started, and back then, I had this close friend, Lila, who was just as fascinated by spooky things as I was. Ghost stories, haunted houses, strange coincidences, all of it. We loved that stuff. One afternoon, Lila's boyfriend asked us if we had ever tried using a spirit board. We hadn't, so he said he'd show us how it worked. Now, I remember feeling pretty skeptical at first. I wanted to believe in things like that, but I also didn't want to be fooled. But the planchette started moving almost right away, and that honestly made me suspicious. I thought one of them had to be pushing it. Then it started spelling out things it really shouldn't have known. Names of grandparents, little family details, things neither Lila nor her boyfriend could have known about me. That was enough for us. We got scared and stopped. We went into the kitchen afterward, trying to laugh it off, but both of us were still rattled. Lila and I were sitting on the counter, and across the room there was this old radio plugged into the wall. We were both looking in that direction when the switch on the outlet slowly pressed down by itself. And then the radio came on. We left his house pretty much immediately. I don't think we even talked much on the way out. We just knew we didn't want to be there anymore. To this day, I don't know whether that was some kind of spirit or whether we were so worked up emotionally that something around us reacted. I know that sounds strange, but what happened later made me wonder about that more and more. Not long after that, my mom and her new partner bought a house so we could all live together. It was my mom, her partner, his son, and me. I was 16 by then, and honestly, I was not happy about any of it. I didn't want to move. I didn't want a stepdad. I definitely didn't want a stepbrother. I was moody, closed off, and probably not very pleasant to live with. I mention that because whatever was going on seemed to be tied to me somehow, or maybe to the emotions I was carrying around at the time. On our first night in the new house, we were all sitting around the dinner table. My stepdad was sitting beside me, and my mom and stepbrother were across from us. They were deep in conversation, and I was just sitting there quietly, sulking. Then, my stepdad's glass started sliding across the table. Not tipping, not vibrating, sliding. He noticed it at the same time I did, and we just stared at each other. Over the next half minute or so, it moved nearly a foot across the table before stopping. Afterward, we tried everything to explain it. We checked if the table was uneven. We tried placing the glass in the same spot again. We pushed the table. We tested for condensation. Nothing worked. We couldn't recreate it. Over the next few months, little things kept happening. Things would go missing and then turn up in odd places. There were strange noises too, but it was an old house, and there were 2 teenagers living there, plus friends coming and going all the time. So I tried not to jump straight to ghosts. But one afternoon, something happened that really shook me. The house was built into a hill, so the front door was at street level, but if you went downstairs, you could exit into the garden. My stepbrother and I had our rooms downstairs, along with a bathroom and a small kitchen area. I came home from school one cold day and went down the stairs. I took off my scarf, hat, and gloves and hung them on the rack near the bottom. Then I bent down to untie my boots. While I was bent over, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. When I turned, my gloves were lying in the middle of the floor. They hadn't just slipped off the rack. They were several feet away from where I had hung them, on the other side of me. There was no normal way they could have landed there. A few months after that, I was home alone on a weekend night. My mom and her partner had gone away, and they had left me in charge. My stepbrother was out at a party, and I think it might have been one of his first real parties, so I was staying awake until he got home. I was in the living room upstairs at street level, so I knew I would hear him come in. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the front door open. Then I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. I called out and told him to shut the door behind him. No answer. I thought maybe he was sick or drunk or something, so I got up to check. The front door was open, but there was nobody there. I looked downstairs too. I was alone. I closed the door and went back to watching TV, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood what I heard. About 45 minutes later, it happened again. The door opened. Footsteps came down the stairs. Still, no one was there. That time, I locked the door. Maybe 10 minutes later, I heard it again. The door opening. The same heavy steps going down the stairs. But when I went into the hallway, the door was still shut and locked. I had heard it clearly, though. There was no mistaking it. By the time my stepbrother actually came home, I was sitting outside waiting for him because I refused to stay in that house by myself any longer. I moved out not too long after that, but sometimes I still stayed over, especially if I had been visiting friends nearby. I had a key, so I didn't always tell my mom and stepdad I was coming. One morning, my stepdad called me and asked why I had left so early. I had no idea what he meant. Then he asked why I had been out in the garden before sunrise. I told him I hadn't been at the house at all. He went quiet for a moment, then said he had woken up during the night and looked out the window. He had seen a female figure standing in the garden. The strange thing is, because of how the house was built into the hill, you couldn't really get into that garden unless you came through the house. Technically, someone could have climbed over from a neighboring garden, but all the neighbors were elderly, and none of them were climbing walls in the middle of the night. I never felt settled in that house. Not then, and not now. It has been more than 20 years since those things happened, and my child spends plenty of time there with her grandparents now. She has never experienced anything unusual, so maybe whatever it was faded away. Or maybe it was never tied to the house at all. Maybe, for a while, it was tied to me.